We're live, everyone.
We'll be starting in 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the City of Waterloo Special Council meeting for Monday, May 31st, 2021 at 2 p.m. We'll begin this meeting with a roll call, beginning with Ward 1. Please go ahead.
Councillor Hanmer, present.
Councillor Bodley here.
Councillor Veith, present.
Councillor Freeman, present.
Councillor Bassick here.
Councillor Henry here.
Councillor Bonagore here.
Thank you, and the mayor is here as well. We would like to begin by acknowledging that the land on which we are broadcasting from today, and many of us are gathering on, is the land traditionally used by the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral people. We also acknowledge the enduring presence and deep traditional knowledge and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land today. I'd like to make a few remarks here. Over the weekend, we learned about the loss of 215 young lives at a residential school site in Kamloops. We mourn the loss of these lives as our national history continues to be revealed in a horrendous way. As a society, we need to address these atrocities and resolve to take action. The City of Waterloo has lowered our flags to honor these children, and now I will call for a moment of silence. Thank you. Now for a moment of reflection. At the beginning of this council meeting, we paused to think about the needs of our community. May we show wisdom and compassion in all our decisions. And again, I'd like to make a few remarks. The weight of the pandemic and the strain on people's physical and mental well-being has been very difficult. People have been required to pivot to different work conditions, and for many, while trying to assist their children with home-based online learning, while worrying about the impacts of isolation. We have seen demonstrations, contrary to the provincial regulations, that risk the spread of this awful virus. We have seen racially based crimes aimed at members of the Black, Indigenous, as well as Asian and other racialized communities, which is not a true reflection of our community. I truly believe the tide is turning. This type of behavior is not welcome and will not be tolerated. Good people are standing united with racialized members of our community, and we all want to see these selfish and racist behaviors stop. On COVID-19, we are also making good progress against the virus. Vaccines are being administered at a very encouraging rate to all parts of the population. Case counts are improving, positivity rate is dropping, and we are seeing some relief for the healthcare system, although that fight is far from over. Better days are ahead. The weather is warming up, restrictions are slowly but assuredly being lifted. Our city is strong. Our people are resilient, and I believe we will be a stronger community as a result of the experiences we have lived through. I thank the residents of our community who have persevered and who have supported family and friends, as well as local businesses. And thank you to my friends on council and city staff. Your dedication to our community has been outstanding, and I'm amazed at how well everyone has overcome obstacles and remained focused on service, all achieved with creativity and passion for our city. Thank you, everyone. I've never been more proud of our community. We are all Team Waterloo. I'll move on in our agenda, and next up is the disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof, and I'll call on Councillor Vasic. Please go ahead.
Thanks through you, Mayor Jaworski. I'm declaring a conflict on 6B, Appeals Tribunal Recruitment for Personal Relationship.
Thank you very much. And I will go to, Councillor Hanmer for later on. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I'm declaring a conflict of interest with item 11E, which is the holding provision on Woolwich Street. I have a family member who is a partner in the firm advising the applicant.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hanmer. Councillor Veith, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski. Although it's not financial, I need to declare as well on the same item as Councillor Vasic, item 9B. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you all. Seeing no further ones, just let me make a note here. I will move on to delegations. I'll just call on the Deputy Clerk to bring in the delegation, and we'll go from there. It's Sustainable Waterloo Region Update with Tola Davidson, Executive Director.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear, Tova.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for having me. It is my annual update to Waterloo City Council, and it's my pleasure to be here today to give you some news on what happened in the past year and just to give a bit of a background for all the things you might have heard happening recently. And for those who were able to make our annual evening of recognition, thanks so much for being there. Next slide, please. 2020 was a unique year for everybody. It doesn't surprise anyone to hear that. And some of the things that we saw, coming up in this community, were focused on the intersectionality of all the social issues that we're facing. And Mayor Jaworski, you talked in your opening about what's been happening in Kamloops and acknowledgement of the land that we're situated in. In the past year, we saw the rise of Black Lives Matter. We saw Land Back Camp come to the fore. And we saw that all of these issues have to be faced together, and that includes sustainability. And I wanted to applaud, next slide, please, the City of Waterloo for some of the work that they've done to work with the people in this community to integrate diversity, inclusion, justice into not only these issues, but also into sustainability, into the future that we're trying to create. It's been the case for us as well, where we've really been shifting and moving towards that integration and the intersectionality of our social issues. Next slide. I'm hoping to highlight today some of the things that we've done in the past year as we all stayed at home. This is some of the team for those who haven't met us, and this was on Earth Day where we did a bit of a celebration, and we were able to move to working when and where worked for us in 2020, when and where was at home. Next slide. And we shifted a lot of how we operated, not only to serve this incredible community, but also to ensure that we were bringing together those social issues into the work that we do, into our organization, into our processes, into all of the elements of our work. Next slide. So to tell you a little bit about our impacts, this is the overview from the past year. And one that I really want to make stand out for you is that we see in the past year that our commitment as individual organizations has grown beyond just what's been happening in the community as well, which we're going to hear about later. In 2019, the Regional Sustainability Initiative membership, for example, had set about 65,000 tons as their target to reduce. But in 2020, 78,000 tons were committed to being reduced and 81,000 tons were actually reduced. So that's amazing, the work that's been done in that group. And at the bottom right bubble there, the blue one, you'll see the volunteers that support Sustainable Waterloo Region have actually donated $316,000 to this community in their time through our organization alone. It's incredible to see what Waterloo can do in a time of need. Next slide, please. I'm not going to talk too much about climate action. We're going to get to that later. But just to give you some idea of where we are and what you're going to hear early, in a couple of minutes is to think about the future that we're trying to create. And in partnership with Reap Green Solutions, we're so proud to be able to bring some of the future planning that's required to get us to that low carbon, prosperous future. But more on that later. Next slide. Electric vehicle technology did continue to grow and the adoption rate continued to grow. And through the Charge WR program, which for us is entirely volunteer run, we supported the community through things like a report with Water Community Energy for how do we have a future with sustainable transportation? How do we encourage more and more electric vehicle technology in terms of charging infrastructure, et cetera? And in the region, we hit over 2,700 electric vehicles registered. Next slide. The Evolve Green, of course, is changed so much in the past year with nobody being able to be in the space. But together we have continued to think about how do we innovate, and through some of the support from the City of Waterloo, we're looking at things in partnership with these partners you see on the screen, like how do we do a community sustainability lab? And that's a piece that we're working on right now, hoping to have something ready for launch in that once we're allowed to be back in the space. Next slide. We also know that Evolve is a place where we are looking at how do we change the culture of the community and individual organizations to integrate sustainability so deeply that you don't need to talk about each and every little change that we need to see. And in partnership with Veris, which is a research institute from Laurier, we're working on that implementation of a culture of sustainability. More slide, next slide. And finally, this is a unique one. The Cora group gets big kudos for this in that they're actually now reporting, and this is for the first time, the energy use of the Evolve 1 building. And you'll see at this graph here that the building that was designed and purported to generate more energy than it needs actually does. For 2 years in a row now, this building has generated more energy than it requires. The typical energy use of the building is about 800,000 kilowatt hours, and we are at about 112%. So proving that this business case, this model works. Next slide. We all have had to work from home. That's a picture of one of my 4 little fur babies to show, you know, everything has changed, and it's changed for our members too. The workplace has changed, and how we support those workplaces have changed. Next slide. And through that change, what we're finding is different ways to support organizations. Through programs like TravelWise, we actually were able to reach out to our membership, and we saw that as a whole, for those who were able to complete the travel survey, instead of the 5% mode split that we were aiming for to shift away from single-use occupancy, we actually went to a 50% mode split during COVID. Everybody worked from home. And the question that that raises is, if we can make this kind of dramatic change happen, if we can actually make change when we see there being an existential threat, what more can we do? And it gives me hope that there's so much we can do for the climate crisis. Next slide. We also saw in TravelWise that organizations and people love working from home. So their mode of transportation was a higher level of satisfaction because of working from home. And so now the future of how do we continue to give supports for this kind of a sustainable choice and to help businesses thrive is a focus that we're looking at. Next slide. In the regional sustainability, I highlighted these numbers already. You'll see that the equivalent, the reduction that we've seen is the equivalent of more than 18,000 cars off the road. That's a lot. That's a big impact. And I give kudos to all those organizations, and the City of Waterloo being one of them, having set a target and working tirelessly to try to reach that target and to exceed it. Next slide, please. We also, in that terms of that integration of the intersectionality of our work and other social issues, the Regional Sustainability Initiative now integrates all of the UN SDGs through a tracking target that we use with the incorporation of the B Labs tool. So we not only support organizations in how do they reach their environmental goals, we also support organizations to help them report on the other SDGs, because we know, like the 17th SDG says, they're all interrelated. Next slide, please. And we heard from our membership that 97% of members anticipated and actually did continue the sustainability efforts through our program, even during COVID-19. Next slide. That's all I've got to present for you today. I know you've got lots on the docket. Happy to answer any questions, and just wanted to give a heartfelt thanks, not only for the support from the City of Waterloo, but also for your partnership, your membership, and all the ways that you integrate with us and that you've been working to make sustainability a central focus of all that you do. We couldn't do it without you, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tova. Your presentations are always an exemplar for everybody else because you come in under time, you cover a lot of topics, and you make it snappy. I always love that. So even whether I see them once or twice through the region, you know, it's always more to learn, and I picked up a few more things. So thank you very much for that. Thank you for all your your team does. I'm glad to see that the team has such a smiling face on Earth Day there, and but I'm sure they're smiling every day. It was really interesting to see that the mode share satisfaction with people's trip to work is essentially unsatisfied has been eliminated, which is certainly amazing. I'll look to councillors to see if they have questions of Tova at this time. I'll look to Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Tova, for the annual presentation. What a year that was! So certainly appreciate your pivoting some of the ways you're presenting and the data that you're providing to us. In the subject of pivots, certainly later today, I'm assuming that we're going to be endorsing a strategy that includes significant shift in how we get around, and so in the context of the charge WR numbers, I think it's been great to watch the reporting out of the significant growth that was happening in these early days to electric vehicles. But my comment and suggestion would be that you take a look at how we can report penetration of that with the total fleet that's out there in the community in terms of all of those vehicles, and sort of look forward to where we're trying to get to, and not just the sort of count of the growth. I think we're in that moment of transition. So I offer that as an observation and a suggestion.
Thanks so much, Councillor Henry. Yeah, I agree. It would be amazing to get numbers like that, and we'll take that offline and see what I can do. Electric vehicle and vehicle numbers is a very difficult thing for us to get. I managed to get those numbers right by the skin of my teeth the day before we were putting these numbers live. So I will integrate that in and see what strings I can pull to get them. Thanks for that.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, data implementation plans, reporting, collective collaboration on all of that is a key part of how we move forward. And I know some data isn't as easy to get as others, but I think those will be helpful metrics for us to be looking at and thinking about. And I commend you on efforts ahead to try to see if how we can get better and better data on this.
Thanks so much.
At this point in time, I do not see any further questions for the delegate. So again, thank you very much. Always really looking forward to seeing you in person at, I guess, the Evolve building. I'll see you, or perhaps on the trails outside there on the picnic table, and we'll have a good chat out there, Tova. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you. Looking forward to it.
Bye-bye. Next up, we move on to the consent motion. And I already know that we need to move item 9B, the Appeals Tribunal recruitment, and I'll look to Councillor Bonagor, who wanted to bring an item up, I believe.
Yes, through you, Mayor Jaworski. I was hoping to set item D aside just for a little bit of further discussion, please.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And so with that, and I'll do the main part first. The consent motion now consists of the 2021 first quarter health and safety report, item C, the fleet management policy, and item E, the Waterloo Advisory Committee on Active Transportation on the Federal Active Transportation Fund, essentially to express written support to the Minister of Infrastructure on the Government of Canada's fund. So with that, I will look to Ward 1, Ward 2, consider moving the consent items as stated.
Councillor Hanmer, happy to move the consent items as stated, and I vote in favor.
Councillor Bodley will second that motion and vote in favor as well.
Councillor Beath, I'm in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor. Councillor Vasek in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. Now I'll take a moment for two of our council members to step away while we consider the Appeals Tribunal recruitment.
Do you just email us when you're ready to have us back?
Yeah, just go away for this will take us 30 seconds.
Yeah, okay, all right.
With that, I will look to, where am I? So I can't go to Ward 3, Ward 4.
I can move it. It's Ward
yeah,
4,
okay, yeah,
Councillor
let's go with-
Freeman.
Yeah, Ward 4, Ward 6, please take us forward on the Appeals Tribunal recruitment.
Councillor Freeman moves the motion and votes in favor.
Councillor Henry seconds the motion and votes in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favour.
Councillor Hanmer in favor.
Councillor Bodley.
In favor, and the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. That is all of us. Very much thank you for all the people who came out, citizens, to volunteer for the Appeals Tribunal. Well done. And I'll invite my other councillors back, and if they could just say hello on the line so that we know they're back.
Councillor Beath, I'm back.
Councillor Vasek back.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we'll now move on to item 9D, an amendment to Animal Control Bylaw 09047 to regulate the keeping of animals. In this case, we're really talking about backyard hens. So I will turn the floor over to Councillor Bonagor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just had a couple of points that I wanted to raise with staff, just some very minor queries that I was wondering we may be able to address today and still move forward with the vote. So the first is that I noticed that the rear lot setback is less than the side yard setback. I just have some concerns that this could inadvertently mean some coops end up being quite close to neighbouring dwellings. So looking for some information from staff on whether we could either potentially extend the rear yard setback to match side yards, or if that goes against the intent of that rear yard line, perhaps there could be a provision that if a coop meets all outlined setbacks but still ends up within X meters of a neighbouring dwelling, written permission must be gained from residents of the dwelling. I've just wanted to bring these to staff and see their feedback on this.
Thank you, and I'll look to Nicole Hapke, who I think is on the line.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Bonagor, it wouldn't be a major issue to change that rear lot setback to be the 1.5 meters as well, and the permissions would still be in place if that's satisfactory to you and to council.
Okay, I think that would help address that one concern that I have. So, Mayor, if I may put that forward as, would that come as an amendment to the proposal?
Yeah, we'll simply move the bylaw as amended, as Nicole just mentioned, matching the setback.
Okay. And the other question I had was whether there was any mechanism by which Bylaw could just check on the veracity of the information being provided through the registration system as it is proposed.
Through you, Chair. Councillor Bonagor, yes, we would put into we're registering the properties as opposed to a permit system, and we would put into those policies a periodic check with permission in advance, if that's satisfactory.
I believe that would be satisfactory to me. So if I can, Mayor, I'm happy to move this with the amendments, and then I'll get
Sure.
feedback from my fellow councillors on that.
Yeah, let's pause to see if there's any further questions that other people had on this, because we don't want to do too many amendments. And
sorry, yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself.
No. I just want to double check. So, Councillor Henry, please go ahead.
On the second amendment that Councillor Bonagor has proposed in consultation, I wanted to hear from staff if there are, or if they would anticipate that there are any cost implications to that aren't otherwise accountable or accounted for or manageable within the what had been recommended to us.
Through you, Chair Jaworski. No, we are anticipating that the fee for the registry would cover. We wouldn't need additional staff. And this is based on our research related to complaints from other municipalities related to backyard hens.
Thank you.
I see no further questions, so I'm going to suggest to Councillor Bonagor that she move item D as amended.
It's through you, Mayor Jaworski. So I will move item D as amended, and I'll vote in favour.
Councillor Hanmer, happy to second the amended item D, and I too will vote in favour.
Councillor Bodley is in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman, I just wanted to thank staff for including the veterinarian in the work on this bylaw. It's helped me a lot, and I'll vote in favor.
Councillor Bassick in favor.
Councillor Henry in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too. That carries unanimously. I know, Councillor Veith, this is something that you had been considering for quite some time, and so anyway, so now it is done. I have a special shout out to Bylaw staff, Bylaw team. It has, well, it's never been, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it's never been busier for all of us, but and it's never been quite unusual that the province creates regulations that Bylaw has to enforce, as they did during COVID. But for the team to work with communications and probably other teams as well to figure this out and come together with writing of the bylaw, with legal and all the teams, probably many involved. Just a special shout out to everyone for making this happen, as this was something I know Councillor Veith wanted to see if we could get her done before summer timeframe, so people who actually wanted to consider hens could become more educated and perhaps start working on their coop during the summer. So, Councillor Veith, any further remarks?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Jaworski. This is a long time coming, in my opinion, and I'm thankful to the staff and all the citizens that reached out. And I just feel like this is the time for this, you know, long overdue. And I think we had a great conversation with the public, and we had great input from citizens on this. And you know, I'm just really thrilled that finally, if people in Waterloo want to have a couple chickens in their backyard, that they can go ahead and do this. So again, thank you so much. It's great.
Yeah, special shout out to staff. Thank you. With that, we move beyond the items removed from the consent motion. We move on to staff reports. And this is really yet another one of the lots of shining examples of exciting things we have on today's agenda, tonight's agenda. And so with that, it's Transform Waterloo Region, report prepared for us by Anna Marie Cipriani. And there is a presentation by Anna Marie, along with Tova Davidson and Mary Jane Patterson of Reap Green Solutions. And with that, I guess I will turn the floor over to Anna Marie.
Thanks, Mayor Jaworski. So you have the staff report in front of you that I authored, and I'll introduce again Tova Davidson, Executive Director of Sustainable Waterloo Region, and the Executive Director of Reap Green Solutions, Mary Jane Patterson. They will together walk us through this presentation to my report, and both of their organizations are a part of the Climate Action Waterloo Region work, along with the 8 local municipalities. So I'll hand it over to them. I will be available along with others for questions during that period.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be back and to thank you for having us here today to talk about Transform Waterloo Region. I am Tova Davidson, just so you know who's speaking, and I'm so happy to be here presenting with my cohort and partner in crime, Mary Jane Patterson from Reap Green Solutions. Next slide. Climate Action Waterloo Region is a program that is run in partnership between Reap Green Solutions and Sustainable Waterloo Region. And that is a really unique model to have a community climate plan done between not-for-profits within a community. And so kudos to that. And we couldn't do it without all of the support of all 8 area municipalities who sit at that table with us and help us to coordinate the activities in Waterloo Region's climate action plans, measure progress, engage the wider community, etc. In 2018, all 8 municipalities did endorse the 80% greenhouse gas reduction target to be achieved by 2050. And since then, the collaborative work with all these people you see on this slide around the table has been going on. Next slide, please. The way that we did this work to create our long-term strategy and short-term plan to reach our targets is through backcasting, and the Federation of Canadian Municipalities granted us some funds to be able to do this. This unique approach requires that you determine what your desired future state is and then work backwards. What are the steps you need to take to get towards where you are now? And that did require us going out to find out what did the community want us to look like in 2050. Next slide. We did go out to the community and talk to them to ask what was the future going to look like. And we spoke to more than 1,600 community members through in-depth interviews and workshops and focus groups and online surveys and all kinds of different ways. And we didn't just talk to the sustainability people. I personally went to a Mopar event and a rodeo. Those were new experiences for me. And what we learned was that this community understood that the low carbon future wasn't just about environment. It was about being more equitable, more prosperous, more resilient, and that a low carbon future is a better future for everybody. Next slide, and over to Mary Jane.
Hello, everyone.
Can
you hear me now?
Absolutely, okay. Mary Jane. Welcome.
Great. Hi, everybody. A pleasure to be here. Well, I'm going to pick it up now with the technical engagement that we had for this plan. We began engaging with technical and subject matter experts, both locally as well as nationally and internationally. We really needed to understand the technical solutions that would help us achieve that vision that our community wanted to see. Next slide, please. This work directly aligns with the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're not talking only about environment and climate related goals because, as you know, they are all reinforcing and related to each other. Next slide, please. We realize that if we're going to become an equitable, prosperous, resilient, low carbon community, we can no longer talk about incremental change. This strategy identifies 4 key calls to action for transformative change. We need to transform the ways we move, the ways we build and operate our spaces, the ways we produce, consume, and waste, and the ways we relate to one another. Next slide, please. You see here what transformative change looks like. The top line shows what would happen with population growth and nothing else if we did nothing. The line in the middle includes adding in industry trends and estimated trajectory. And then the green line going down on the bottom, that is the pathway that gets us to an 80% reduction in carbon emissions by 2050. And that includes the trends, the population growth, and our conscious changes to meet our 80 by 50 goal. I want to just mention that before we finalized the strategy, it was available for a final public consultation, and that included municipal staff, utilities, the agricultural sector. There was an equity and sustainability justice review of the plan and widespread public consultation on the Engage platform. And you'll see in your appendix, part of the staff report shows how that feedback received was integrated into the final plan. Now I'd like to turn it over to Tova to show how these 4 calls to action that I spoke about translate into 6 transformative changes.
Thanks, Mary Jane. Next slide, please. Before we talk about each of these, I just want to note that in this strategy and plan, you'll see that there are lead organizations. And in all cases, when a municipality is a lead organization, it's always in partnership with other municipalities. We are a community that does things together, and that's the case in this plan and strategy as well. So just as a note for that. The first transformative change we need to look at is that by 2050, most of our trips should be taken through active transportation and with the support of a robust public transit system. Next slide, please. And we know that there's municipal support that needs to be in place to make that happen. So what can your municipality do to get us there? Well, we can redesign, rebuild, maintain transportation systems that actually enable and prioritize active transportation. And even more, when we're designing communities and considering redevelopment in communities and development within existing spaces, that we build complete communities where people can make the choice to walk, bike, or take transit when that's the best option for them. Next slide. Sticking in the areas of transportation, we also know that we need to, by 2050, have all of our vehicles be zero emission vehicles. Next slide. Zero emission vehicles can be from a variety of sources of energy. And what the municipality can do to help get us there is to help switch your commercial vehicles to zero emission vehicles, and more are coming on the market all the time, as well as supporting the building of an infrastructure for charging and refueling stations. Next slide. Transformative change number 3 is that we need to, by 2050, no longer be using fossil fuels for space heating and cooling and water heating in our buildings, transforming the ways we build and the way we use spaces. Next slide, please. Municipalities have a role in this one as well, including offering loans or energy-related building upgrade incentives or offers to be able to help with that, as well as a one-window service to support energy-related upgrades, and that all new buildings should be, or existing buildings transitions to a net zero carbon. Next slide.
The next 2 transformative changes are both about the ways we produce, consume, and waste. So by 2050, Waterloo Region needs to use less, waste less, and no longer dispose of organic matter in landfills, because the methane that results is a much more damaging greenhouse gas emission than carbon dioxide. So our goal here is to maintain the same level of methane emissions from our landfills that we had in 2010, even though we'll have a higher population. Next slide, please. So how can our municipalities help us get there? Well, one example is through campaigns to promote waste reduction and a circular economy where we use less, we keep it longer, and we repurpose it at the end. Another one is to take a look at demolitions and try to reduce construction waste by not only doing them when absolutely necessary. Next slide, please. Change number 5 is about developing a thriving local food system built on local farming, food production, and processing that feeds our community. The agricultural community has been directly affected by climate change and has a strong interest in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Our goal here is similar, to maintain the same level of methane emissions from livestock that we had in 2010 over the next 30 years. And that's going to mean eating food from close to home, reducing the emissions created by each animal, and consuming fewer animal products per person. Next slide, please. How can our municipalities get there? We can all be being very careful to protect our agricultural lands and the local agricultural system. We can also be demonstrating all the local plant-based food options that we have when we have catered events. Next slide, please. This transformation forms the backbone for all of this work. We want to leverage greenhouse gas reductions in a way that increases equity, prosperity, and resilience for all. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to build the community that we want, and this came through so strongly in our community consultations. We must support the members of our community that need it most. And we want to work towards producing renewable energy locally and becoming recognized as a national leader in sustainability and clean tech. Next slide, please. So how can our municipalities get us to this? A crucial first step is establishing metrics to measure our progress in creating climate action solutions that increase equity. We can also take a look at protecting lands for renewable energy generation And most importantly, we want to work together in advocacy to the province and the federal government for the policies and programs that transform the systems they control. Next slide, please. This council has been big champions of this work, and we want to say a very big thank you to you for that. You've also had a tremendous champion for climate action in Anna Marie Cipriani. We want to say very big thanks to Michelle Lee before her and to Anna Marie especially for the work that she did around our table, bringing her own knowledge and expertise and working within your municipal teams to connect and answer questions and start us towards integration of this plan into your municipal work. In closing, I want to say it really is an inspiring read to see what our community envisioned and the actions that we're proposing. We are so honored to roll up our sleeves and work with you to make a more equitable, prosperous, and resilient community together.
Thank you very much, Mary Jane, and thank you, Tova and Anna Marie. I know you're available, and we received some thanks from our external providers for the City of Waterloo team as well, so thank you very much for that. We are all certainly keen on making progress, as we know there is much work to be done, and I really thank you for producing such a positive presentation on how we might move forward, because as you know, this is a crisis, this is an emergency, but just with the presentation saying that we can do this, that's what I always think about when I think about Sustainable Waterloo Region, Reap Green Solutions, is we can do this. And thank you both for the positive presentation today. I'll look to councillors to see if they have any questions of the delegates. We have a number of delegates coming up. Please go ahead, Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Tova, MJ, and Anna Marie for you and through you to everyone who's put in such significant work in collecting some fantastic input and data from the community. I think honestly that community consultation document that's part of this is something we don't see very often in terms of the depth and breadth and just the the rich tapestry that was woven through that process. And I think that really was transformative in its own way for how we think about how we do that work. So and then coming up with this very comprehensive locally driven plan. So I wanted to start with thank you. I'm going to jump straight to assuming, of course, we endorse this comprehensive strategy today, and that all the other councils do, and ask you to cast your mind forward. I think Anna Marie in particular, from the municipal perspective, on what comes next. Implementation plans are coming next, but can you tell us a bit more about next steps and some of the work that we've already got in progress?
Sure. Through you, Chair Jaworski, to Councillor Henry. So when we look at this work, there are 78 specific actions. As a municipality, we are named in 44 of those. And when we are named as a municipality, we are named along most often with our other municipal counterparts, so the other 7 other local municipalities. Of all those actions, there are 22 that we are lead on. And so in general, there's kind of a twofold focus, I think, that's going to need to unfold. So firstly, obviously, it's a community plan, and we're going to need to collaborate and to continue to collaborate across our community through the different sectors to move those actions forward. But there is also very much a corporate play here. And so in many of those actions that we are listed as lead, we need to really begin to look inward to the organization and better understand how it is that we can move the needle forward on this work. And so we have most recently, through a reorg, established the environmental sustainability team. That has representatives of staff across the organization who are positioned in that team to be able to support this work. And so we are focusing on our corporate climate action plan, and will now, as well as this document moves through the 8 municipalities by the end of June, we will begin to move forward with this work as well, and specifically with those action items that are listed for us as a municipality.
Thank you, Anna Marie. I think that's helpful context for some of what's to come. I want to dive into a couple of specifics. I know that we've seen already that the city has in its energy conservation demand management plan a 50 by 30 path and an 80 by 50 path that's already come before us. And we've adopted new policies around green buildings to help drive some of that, since most of our emissions come from facilities. But I know through the budget process that one of our biggest challenges has been in sort of future casting how we achieve emission-free fleet in the municipal department. So I was wondering, I think Tracy's on the line here too. Tracy, if you could, comment on what some of the next steps are for fleet over the next couple of years, where we're at and where we're going.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Currently, we're undertaking some fleet transformation activities that were identified through a fleet review that was conducted in 2018 and 2019. Those activities are going to provide us with a foundational base to enable us to develop a plan to lower fleet emissions. So one of the first steps was the fleet policy that was approved earlier. Thank you, everyone. And within the policy, we identify a commitment to incorporate new technologies that would include fossil-free options where technically, operationally, and financially viable, and also to look at developing a green fleet action plan. One of our next steps is to collect data. We need to understand the data pertaining to our vehicles, utilization rates, to determine really what would be viable options. The goal is next year to hire a third-party consultant to help us do a review of our current fleet and look at identifying for us what vehicles might be options for zero emission or lower emission. In some instances, I think we're going to need to look at hybrid electric or plug-in hybrid electric, or maybe some alternate fuel vehicles. And some of the other considerations we're going to need to look at is, in addition to the market availability of alternatives, just the operational feasibility. So equipment we currently use, we try and use and have a heavy utilization for our equipment, and there would be impacts for downtime needed for charging. There's going to be infrastructure considerations, charging stations, space for charging stations, understanding the cost of those, the project management staff to even hire someone to build the charging stations. I'd like to look at the environmental impacts of the zero emission alternatives, just understanding battery life cycle, disposal, recycling opportunities. What does that look like for us? Training. So our goal is really to get more information, more data, and then hopefully starting in 2023, have a better sense of a plan, how we can move forward. In the meantime, as we do our annual replacement program, if there's opportunities for lower or zero emission fleet, we definitely are investigating those and how they impact based on the funding that we have in our equipment reserve.
Thank you, Tracy. I think that's sort of helpful to know that we already are seeing what steps are necessary so that we can make good decisions around fast action, so that the municipality can lead at least as much as we're asking the community to lead on the electrification or the zero emissioning of vehicles across the community. And I'd highlight for those that don't know, of course, through this kind of process, our municipal building officials have already made a transition to electric vehicles for their fleet entirely over the past couple of years, and I see them out on the road. So this is a good start to that leadership. That's all for me for now.
Thank you very much, Councillor Henry. We will be coming back to you in a moment. Over to Councillor Bodley, please.
Thank you, through you, Mayor Jaworski. My question is around sort of how we got to it. I know there's been a lot of discussion around the targets and 50 by 30 versus the 30 by 30, 80 by 50 versus 100 by 50. And so I'm interested in getting an understanding from the team a little bit more on that backcasting part of the conversation. So we looked at a desired future state. Was that desired future state 80 by 50? Is that what we looked at, or was that desired future state more sort of just aspirational in general? So I'm just getting a little would like a little bit more information about how that backcasting process worked. What did we start with, but to look back from?
Thanks, Councillor Bodley. Through you, Chair Jaworski, I think Tova may be best positioned to answer that question if you'd like to do so first, perhaps followed by MJ. But I think that Tova, you spoke to that in the presentation. Does that sound
of course
fair?
Yep.
Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Anna Marie. When we talked to the community about the desired future state, instead of asking them numbers, so that was part of the consultation, we asked them what was the future that they desired. So that's where part of that came from. We then asked them to try to set a barometer as to where they thought we could get to by 2050. The other side of that work went into the technical, and we were asking the technical experts who we worked with at Walter Fady to show us what we could do with local action, how far we could reach with local action, with knowing that the target set by all the municipalities was to 80% by 2050. If we were going there, what was the local action? How far could we take ourselves by 2030? And that's where that came to, is that the local action can get us to that 30%. MJ, is there anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I'll just note that before we began making this plan, we worked to decide what that target for 2050 should be with the community and brought that before our councils.
And I remember all the community consultation for that with a great big board that had 0 to 100 across the top, and inviting everybody to put their sticker on it about where they thought we should be and could be by 2050. And that, in addition to where other municipalities were all going at that time and other other types of government, really led to the 80% target as our starting point that we then found the funding to create the strategy for.
Okay, I appreciate that. That's very helpful for me. And so sort of a secondary and then probably a tertiary question to this for you guys, if you don't mind, is so what did I know on page 54 of the report, there's sort of a 30 by 30, these would be the percent of the various actions that would need to happen, 50 by 30, here's this percentage. So when the report was worked on and it's sort of the list of actions that we're looking at undertaking sort of led to a place where it no longer conforms with what the science is suggesting we need to hit, which is 50 by 30. And when the report was put together and the technical analysis was concluded, and that's where we came to, was these actions are going to lead us to a 30 by 30 future that does not conform with the science anymore. What was sort of the thought process amongst the folks working on that report, and was there any conversation about pushing those actions within the report harder to say, no, we need to do more? I'm looking for some feedback on that conversation.
I can start if that's helpful.
It's Mary Jane here.
I would say that there's the science that shows us what our planet needs to do. And there's the science that shows us what is possible through local action. And that is that second is what we pushed as far as we could with the strategy that we are bringing forward now. I would want to just note how extraordinarily ambitious it is to reach 30% by 2030. And maybe I'll see if Tova has anything to add to that.
Thanks for that, Mary Jane. Agreed with what Mary Jane was saying, and I want to just make sure when I framed the first part of that answer to the question, it's that this is what local action can do. It's not that we don't believe that more can be done, but this is a local action plan. This is what we can do using local areas of jurisdiction, local funding, etc. We have called in the report on provincial and federal government to step up to fill that gap to what the science needs. And we encourage that we need to be looking not just at what Waterloo Region can do, but the plan we've put together is what can we do exclusively within our own local actions.
That's awesome and a very helpful context. And my last question that sort of revolves around this sort of targets and action sort of conversation. So when you guys look at the report, do you look at the report as saying, here's the goal, 80 by 50, 30 by 30, and then these are the actions that we need to do to support or to reach that goal? Or alternatively, do you guys look at the report and say, these are the actions we need to do, period? And there's the possibility that maybe we need to do more as we go through here, but this report outlines a list of actions that need to happen. And I ask this given the context of what you just said, Tova, around the federal and provincial government needs to step up. And I ask this in an optimistic tone. If the provincial government and the federal government do indeed step up and rise to the task that we have at hand, and they are contributing what they need to contribute, and a 50 by 30 goal becomes more feasible through the actions that are prescribed within this plan, do you feel like this plan saying 30 by 30 is likely to suggest that a future council or future group might look at this and say, no, we're going to hit 30 by 30, not necessarily through the actions that were listed in this report, but because the federal and provincial government stepped up. And so as a result, we no longer need to do these actions per se. I'm looking for some feedback on what your thoughts are on that.
If I can just start that one, it's Tova speaking. To be a little less formal, I want to say not on my watch, or MJ's, I'm sure too. I think what we're aiming for is this is what we believe ambitiously we can do within local action. And we are excited for the opportunity to see what provincial and federal government is doing, and then work with all of our counterparts and the great people from the municipalities, including your staff representatives, Anna Marie, and you as council and future councils, to say, look, we have opportunity to do more, and to use that ongoing partnership to drive towards more when more opportunity comes. And that's not just in policy, it's also new technologies or other changes in society.
That's all for me, and that was very helpful. And I just wanted to say thank you for all of the conversations and the help sort of contextualizing that. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much for all the work. Back to you, Jaworski.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley. And just in an unusual situation, we do have that new clause, or the extra clause from Councillor Henry, that we will be bringing to people's attention before we get to delegates, just so everybody has a heads up on that, on how upper levels of government can help out. But in the meantime, over to Councillor Bonagor.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. So first of all, Tova and MJ, thank you so much for all of the work you have done, not just with this, but over the many years of helping lead the region on absolutely essential work. Climate Action WR is close to my heart after sitting on a couple of your advisory panels, so full confession there. But I just want to start off by saying thank you. Now, for my question, like it's quite clear that the big changes we need to see are rooted in strong policy, but there is a role for individuals. So climate action will involve some level of self-sacrifice. Like, we all need to be making hard choices now, but in a spirit of generosity to each other and to our future selves. You kind of allude, it's in the report, we need to find a way to be happier with less. And for me, that means on many scales, smaller houses, fewer flights, less consumption overall, and use less, waste less is a very powerful mindset. But I'm looking to you, if either one of you, or Anna Marie, if you'd like to weigh in on as well, how do we bring people along and into this?
Okay, I'll take a first crack. It's Mary Jane here. I think one of the most important parts of it is that we do it together. I just feel that this is something that our whole community wants to be part of and invested in. And I do think that a lot of us feel trapped in systems we can't figure out how to get out of. And that as we work together to try to transform those systems, and especially as we get support from the other levels of government that control some of those systems, that's where we can really see that making change becomes part of how we are all living differently. And I do want to say that we are here to support, and we're working on that at REAP with financing for kind of innovative financing for home energy retrofits and other supports to try to provide a kind of wraparound support. I know that SWR is working on ways to support businesses, and I just feel like an important part of this is that we all work together as a community, and that helps us feel like we are not left out of something that we might be doing differently. Tova.
And yeah, if I can just add to that, I think too, there's a bit of a mind shift that we need to do, that sustainability doesn't have to be a situation of lack or of loss. And in many cases, it actually can be more prosperous and a better future and a better life. And I would point to some of the members of our regional sustainability initiative that they actually have become more profitable. All of the biggest companies in the world are focusing on sustainability, reducing their impact on the environment, and making more money doing it. GM alone made $5 million a year more by creating circular economy uses for its waste. So just to have people thinking this can be actually a more prosperous, a better future. It doesn't have to be losing things.
Those are really great points. Thank you. And I will do everything I can to support you. Thank you.
Excellent questions, Councillor Bonagor. I think, yeah, that's the lifestyle change that we all need to make can be for a better life. And I love that messaging. Councillor Vasic, please.
Thanks through you, Mayor Jaworski, and thanks so much for your delegations and all the work you've done leading up to this so far. I'm really excited about this strategy. I'm excited for climate action, and I'm excited that we're also thinking about it in terms of climate justice. When you talked, Tova, about the intersectional lens of the strategy. So I guess then what's interesting is when you talk about, it's actually better financially for, companies and the economy. And I guess just it's more of a, it's a comment and a question, which is better for whom, and how are we going to really keep asking that question throughout the process? Better for whom, better for whom? And because for some, climate action will take away some of the things that we're feeling entitled to, but for some, we need to redistribute and give more to some who aren't able to participate in climate action the same way and are actually disproportionately negatively affected by climate action. So I guess it's more of a, theoretical question is, how do you envision that consistently asking better for whom through the process?
Shall I start, Tova?
Sure.
Well, it's Mary Jane here. I just find that message in our plan so inspiring. And we're started on one of the first parts of implementation from the REAP side, with a design study that we're undertaking to create this energy retrofit program for Waterloo Region. and really taking a page from Transform WR to make sure that equity is built into it and to ask ourselves how lower income households can participate, if they can, and if loans are helpful there, and if they are not helpful, how we can prepare so that we are ready, because the federal government needs to implement a national low-income energy efficiency strategy. And part of that is that we just issued an RFP for an equity consultant to work alongside us so that we are really paying attention to every aspect of what we're developing in this home energy retrofit program, to see that to ask ourselves that exact question. What are the barriers for people we may not be thinking of, to make sure that as many people as possible are able to participate? And I think we want to just keep returning to Transform WR and the principles within it that are our guideline. Tova.
Thanks, Mary Jane. Yeah, I'll pick that up. You know, in the governance conversations about how do we move this plan forward, the people around the climate action table are also talking about ongoing integration of this lens into all of our sector committees and our work as we move forward. So equity, justice, inclusion. We're so lucky here in Waterloo Region to have the Veris Institute here that is focusing, that's through Waterloo University and Dr. Manuel Reamer, that is focusing on justice and climate justice, and some strong partnerships there that we want to continue to move those forward. And, you know, this isn't a community that does things in isolation. And Mary Jane was talking about some of the great things that REAP is doing to integrate this. At SWR, we've recently in the past year done a anti-racism and sustainability event. We've had a eco-anxiety event that we've run. And we're about to, actually, this is the first time I'm telling you when we're about to launch a podcast on diversity and sustainability to hear diverse voices as well. So this isn't just something that climate action needs to work on. I think this is something that all of our other activist partners in the community are concerned about. This has permeated through Waterloo Region's understanding. The ethos of what this work is that we're doing is about prosperity and justice. And things like local energy generation means prosperity and a more equitable diversion of our energy so that nobody's left behind. Or some of the great things that Mary Jane was talking about, low-income housing. How do we do this? And how do we share with the world? More than just how do we make Waterloo Region better? How do we share with the world all these great things that we're innovating here?
Thank you so much. It's so great to hear what you're already doing and how you're both so also really excited about it and have jumped in both feet to get them wet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Vasek. And I don't see any further questions from Council at this time. So I assume you'll be staying on to listen in, but thank you very much for your presentation, Tova and Mary Jane. And what I'm going to do now is, because it's unusual, so this recommendation, this motion is going to all councils locally. It just happens to be first here at the City of Waterloo. And that gives us some time for all councillors throughout the region to give thought to it. However, we're first out of the gate. And there is going to be an amendment that's coming up that is known to certainly some people that will be coming up, but not to all. So for the benefit of all delegates, and this is unusual in the fact that we aren't even talking about the motion yet, we don't have an amendment on the table, but I'd like to share with the delegate, Councillor Henry, and I think Councillor Bonagor and maybe even others have come up with of an additional clause for the motion. And I'm just wondering if maybe our Deputy Clerk can bring that up, and maybe Councillor Henry could just give an overview of it rather than us debating it. I think you know what I mean, Councillor Henry. Please go ahead.
Sure. I see Clerks has put up the resolution that contains the staff report recommendations plus a new clause 4, which is between the old 3 and 4, which I crafted in consultation with a number of parties. And I think I would summarize it by stating I think it speaks for itself in many ways for what it's intending to do, and that's speaking to in principle what we know an interim absolute community reduction target needs to be, but also putting that in the context of the additional action that's required to help achieve it. And I'll say more when we get into debate. So it's it is not replacing the strategy; it's in fact affirming the strategy and amplifying, clarifying some elements of it and amplifying it to speak to many of the concerns that and questions and advocacy that have been raised.
Councillor Henry, just for accessibility benefits, perhaps you could read it out in case people aren't actually watching or seeing the presentation.
Yes, I can. Yes, I can play screen readers since that doesn't work live. The addition would be that Council endorse in principle an interim absolute community GHG emissions reduction target of 50% by 2030, recognizing that the bold and immediate local actions in the attached Transform WR strategy, Appendix A, are expected to achieve a 30% reduction by 2030. Council emphasizes that bold and immediate actions from the provincial and federal government will also be required to reach this deeper reduction target. And screen reader.
Thank you. Yep. No, thank you very much for that. Just we always want to make sure everybody has the benefit of this new and fresh information. And with that, I'm going to look to our Deputy Clerk, Natalia, to provide delegates with information on how to unmute and that. I'll just double check with Natalia if your microphone is working.
Hi, Mayor. I just need to know which delegate.
Oh, as I call them up. Okay, I will do that. Thank you very much, Natalia. So first up, and just for the benefit delegates, we do have a number here today. Some who registered last week will get 10 minutes. Others will get 5 minutes. And whenever possible, speak to new information. We do have a list of about 10 delegates here, and we value all your input, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Well, so does Council. And now, so first up is, it's actually our Waterloo Sustainability Advisory Committee, and we have the co-chairs, Matt and Sarah, along with member Lucas of the University of Waterloo.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope everyone can hear me okay. And
yes,
thanks for the opportunity to present. Perfect. My name's Matt Tyson, and I am the chair for the Sustainable Advisory Committee to the City of Waterloo. And my co-presenters can introduce themselves as well.
Hi, my name is Sarah Gorpade. I'm vice chair of the committee.
Hi, my name is Lucas Malami, and I am the student resource for the Sustainability Advisory Committee.
Next slide, please. So we're here today to speak in support of the staff report and of the Transform WR plan that is being brought forward. And this is based on a recommendation that was unanimously endorsed by the Sustainability Advisory Committee at our last meeting in May. That SAC endorses the Transform WR Community Climate Action Plan, that we recommend that the City of Waterloo endorse the plan, and urges that, consistent with the Climate Emergency Declaration from 2019, the city mobilize resources and takes urgent action to accelerate implementation. Next slide.
So SAC recognizes and would like to underscore the urgency of the need for action on climate change. And I'm sure we've all heard this before, but it bears repeating, that the next decade is an absolutely critical one, with bold action being necessary to avoid the most drastic and irreversible impacts of climate change and to address the climate emergency. And this also means acknowledging inherent equity issues, as we've been hearing over the past half hour. that climate change will disproportionately impact the most vulnerable members of our community. This is true across Canada and indeed at a global level as well. And we recognize that Transform Waterloo Region presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity for the City of Waterloo to set on a course to a more climate-safe future in alignment with the Paris Agreement. Next slide, please.
From the perspective of the Sustainability Advisory Committee, we have selected here just a few of the many items that we appreciate from the Transform Waterloo Region Plan. This includes a necessary region-wide approach to climate action planning, especially given the interconnected economic, infrastructural, and geographic reality of the region of Waterloo. In addition, the use of decarbonization targets, both in the short and long term, are critical to setting up alignment with existing and future policy. These policy initiatives must always be conscious of our climate action goals. Climate action can be taken at all levels, from the individual household to the entirety of the region of Waterloo, all while recognizing the interconnected issues of climate justice, equitable action, social and physical well-being, public health, and the vibrancy of our community. Next slide, please.
So the staff report, as council will be aware, it certainly highlighted some of the areas on what this means for the city specifically, and what are some of those actions that the city is going to need to own and take a leadership role within. We wanted to highlight a few high-level pieces here that SAC thinks is necessary at a macro level to really make progress on each of these. And so there were 5 areas that we wanted to call out in particular that I think should be paid attention to very carefully by council and senior leadership within the city. And the first one is, of course, the city has stated in many areas to take a leadership role on climate action. And we would certainly hope and encourage the city to do that, but also making sure that's done collaboratively with our local municipal partners so as to not create competitiveness issues or undercut action that's happening in other places. And so striking that balance is really critical. This certainly takes a whole of government approach. We're excited to hear about the Environmental Sustainability Committee that's being formed, and want to make sure that this is from top to bottom something that is considered across all levels of government. And all strategic plans and all action plans on any topic, that this is a lens that's brought to that. And we recognize that some recently approved plans might have recommendations or outcomes that are not yet consistent with the directions that are being set out here today, and that those will need to be explored further and amended. Again, climate change must be in all city decision-making at the employee level through council. And that we want to emphasize that link to the equity considerations must be present in how we make decisions on climate implementation and on climate change implementation and on impact. And our 4th point is on the sensitivity of the timescale that we're talking about here, and recognizing that decisions made today, especially as they involve infrastructure, are with us for potentially generations to come. And making sure that we are getting things right in the short term is extremely important to avoid lock-in of long-term emissions that become either impossible or prohibitively expensive to reduce in the future. And the last point, and I think all of these are mentioned in some point throughout Transform WR, is ensuring that there's a robust communication strategy from the municipality to our community stakeholders, both in homes and residences, as well as the business community. And that this is rolled out across, again, from that whole of government approach, all channels that the city currently uses to communicate with our community members. Next slide, please.
So what does bold action look like? Of the actions in Transform Waterloo that Waterloo leads or collaborates on, as SAC, we want to emphasize those with the highest impact on emissions, that being active transportation and reducing emissions from buildings. So actions that prioritize active and low carbon transit and getting people out of cars, including through disincentivizing driving. We can mention here actions 1.1.1 and 1.1.3. And we looked around for a few examples for inspiration that demonstrate such bold action, including from Vancouver, where the Transportation 2040 plan targets that 2/3 of all trips by 2040 be made by active transportation, and they're committed to achieving that through broad community engagement and partnerships. and car-free zones in Bogota, Colombia, where auto traffic is prohibited in a large swath of the downtown core on Sundays, which has led to significant local economic, social, and health benefits to the city. And indeed, right here in Waterloo, where we've seen bike lanes and closed street pilots during the pandemic, demonstrating that we really can rethink what our city streets are for and that such actions can be implemented swiftly. With respect to building emissions, we can mention actions 3.2.3 and 3.2.7. And we urge requirements that new construction be zero carbon or as close to it as possible. For example, aiming to adhere to the Toronto Green Standard rather than minimum code requirements, which will not only reduce emissions now, but avoid the need for costly retrofits down the road. And adopting retrofit programs such as the Toronto Energy Retrofit Loan Program. And overall, we urge that actions reflect a recognition of the long timescales on which these decisions have impact, and the need to avoid actions that will lock us into longer term emissions. Next slide, please.
So as delegates from the Sustainability Advisory Committee, we are proud to offer our support for Transform Waterloo Region to encourage action on all the transformative changes, strategies, and actions in the plan. SAC will also help monitor and evaluate progress made by the City of Waterloo and stakeholders to further support a culture of accountability as it relates to climate action. As well, SAC will also stand by municipal efforts to address these actions as long as these efforts are sufficient to meaningfully contribute to the level of action that is required. Next slide.
So that's everything that we wanted to share today. And we again encourage council to look favorably and endorse the recommendations that have been brought forward for Transform WR.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Matt, Sarah, and Lucas, and for highlighting all the different values in there. And I think you're right that we need to continue to communicate. We need to enhance the communication to citizens on the advantages of what we're doing here, because we really need to bring everyone along. Unlike upper levels of government where you can just create a policy and businesses throughout Canada or Ontario have to follow suit, here we have to inspire people. And I think through active and often communication, we can help bring everyone along. And I just wanted to bring in Councillor Bodley to this conversation. Please go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Mayor Jaworski. And yeah, thank you, Matt and Sarah and Lucas. I really just, I often speak about my time on SAC here at Council, and it is rare that I get the opportunity to say thank you to you guys publicly and to share my great appreciation for all of the work that SAC does in general, and on this topic in particular. Just an excellent presentation, very thoughtful, and speaks to a lot of the hard work that we have to do as a council, and the hard work that residents have to do in order for us to envision that equitable, prosperous, resilient, low carbon community that the report envisions. So I just thank you very much for this, and I really appreciate the report.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Bodley. There are no further questions, so I will let the three delegates go and move on to our next delegate, Mike Morris, resident of Kitchener, who has up to 10 minutes. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and good afternoon to you and to the rest of Council. For those attending or listening this afternoon who have not met before, my name is Mike Morris, and I founded Sustainable Waterloo Region almost 15 years ago. With Mary Jane Patterson and several others, I helped launch Climate Action WR in the years that followed. And a decade ago, I was part of the team that co-presented to this council our community's first climate plan, which is referenced in the staff report. While, as Mayor Jaworski mentioned, I'm not a constituent. I live in Kitchener on Block 2 of the Haldeman Tract. I'm joining you tonight as a neighbor and as a friend to comment on Transform WR. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I strongly encourage Council to support the Transform WR Climate Action Strategy. It's an ambitious plan that reflects incredible work by a wide mix of community members and organizations. And as you've heard this afternoon, Transform WR is the result of years of consultation and technical review. The community and city staff have done their jobs well. They've prepared a plan rooted in local actions that taken together would transform our community for the better. As well, I join others in encouraging you to fully align the strategy with climate science as called for by scientists, Indigenous leaders, and young people for decades. And this includes, at minimum, a 50% by 2030 target. As staff rightly point out in their report, and as was mentioned earlier, the City of Waterloo will not be able to achieve this target on its own. You will need stronger leadership from our provincial and federal governments to do so. Wisely, staff have already included ongoing advocacy to both these levels of government as part of their recommendation in what I believe is now item 5 of the updated motion. In both supporting a 50 by 30 target and approving the Transform WR strategy, you would not only be supporting the incredible work that our community has done, but showing the leadership we need of you, of all elected officials, to be bold in setting targets that align with climate science and committing to ongoing advocacy and engagement with other levels of government to ensure that collectively we do our fair share in pursuit of both a sustainable and equitable future. As a council, you've shown leadership on the climate crisis before. Years ago, when you unanimously supported our community's first climate action plan, and again more recently in 2019 when you adopted a resolution affirming the climate emergency we're in. You've got a strong track record of showing leadership on the climate crisis and encouraging others to follow suit. And so particularly as Mayor Jaworski had mentioned earlier, given you're the first of all area municipalities considering Transform WR, I hope you'll continue in this tradition by supporting this strategy this afternoon and adding a 50 by 30 target to align with climate science. Thanks so much for your time. Happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Very much, Mike. Always good to hear from you from when we first met, when you were just out of university and starting Sustainable Waterloo Region when I was at RIM. Always appreciated your contributions to the community and guiding us forward on such environmental initiatives, and look where we are today. I will turn it over to Councillor Hanmer, who has a question.
Thank you, Mayor, through you. Mike, thank you very much for your contribution to our discussion today. I'm just curious, as we've been looking and listening to this, it is a fairly aggressive plan, and one I think has lots of strong merits for us building our community. As someone who's been involved in this for many years and has been trying to grow let me say the movement of creating a sustainable Waterloo region, what would you say, what advice would you provide to us as we are looking at implementation strategies for some of these goals and targets to achieve?
Thanks for the question, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. Most importantly, at this stage of the climate crisis, I think it's so important that we have elected officials who are first and foremost honest about the science and ready and willing to work with all levels of government to act with the level of ambition that is now required. I think it's disappointing when we often see one level of government sort of pointing at the other to say, you know, it's their job or to kind of pass the buck. And so my advice for you is that you've got a community plan here that is so deeply supported and has gone through such strong technical review to show all that is possible locally, and what will be required to now follow through to have the aspiration to align with science is this advocacy and this work with other levels of government to work with them, to encourage them to put in place policies that will allow us to follow through on targets that align with science. And this is going to require significant changes to electrifying the grid, to the way we move around, etc. Those that are in addition to what is possible here locally. And so through you, Chair, I would just encourage Council to remain committed to your leadership in the past and your continued work with all levels of government to ensure that that's possible.
Great, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanmer. I do not see any further questions, Mike, so thank you very much for registering and weighing in and for such a tight presentation. It's always welcome, very much. Thank you.
Thanks again for your time.
I'll now go to delegate number 3, Kai Reimer, representative of 50 by 30, and Megan Rutten, representative of the group 50 by 30. We'll just welcome those aboard.
Hi, I'm just going to take the lead on this.
Yeah,
so good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and Council. I'm Meg Rattan-Walker, and this is my colleague Kai Reimer-Watts. We're here to represent 50 by 30 Waterloo Region, a group of organizers operating on the principle that climate action is urgent and speed is justice. So in 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change released its 1.5 report outlining the actions countries would need to take in order to keep global temperatures under 1.5 degrees of climate change. The overarching goal of these solutions is halving emissions by 50% by 2030. Committing to that goal of 50% reductions in greenhouse gas emissions is commensurate with Waterloo Region's obligations both locally and globally. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so I won't read these all out, but the point is we've been doing a lot to help galvanize local communities into action and support good actions and work already taking place by others, especially centering support for climate solutions and social justice. As organizers, we've had to pivot our strategies during this pandemic, but we've managed to organize dozens of diverse community events. And we know we still have the encouragement and spirit of thousands of residents behind us, as we saw that support embodied clearly at the climate strike in Waterloo 2 years ago. As of today, over 3,500 emails have been sent to local councillors across the region in support of 50 by 30 and the Transform strategy. And so we're convening community to continue to do this work. Next slide. So we also recognize the vital work Climate Action WR has accomplished, and that has gone into informing the Transform report, which is a critical part of catalyzing local solutions. And we endorse this strategy to approve today to get us moving immediately into action, while respectfully insisting we need to aspire to more to meet our present global moment, as others have mentioned. So Waterloo Region must act with speed based in science. We sent a letter to each councillor in the region included in our appendices that recommends approval of the Transform strategy. Must also include an in-principle commitment to meet the science-based target to reduce emissions 50% by 2030. This includes a commitment to direct advocacy to higher levels of government, to provide added support to help achieve this as stated in the strategy itself, and accountability with progress reports in line with the plan. These actions will also increase pressure for higher levels of government to act boldly towards 50 by 30 as well, as we've heard. Note that this call for advocacy does not diminish our responsibility to do everything we can through local action starting now, still the top priority. Next. Next slide. So there's a saying that prevention is the best medicine. And relating to the current context of the COVID pandemic we're in, to address the climate emergency, we must act with integrity today on what we know at the scale of the crisis we face to reduce future harms as much as possible. It's our duty to do all we can to prevent the worst possible outcomes of climate change while catalyzing a far brighter, more resilient and just clean energy future. Next.
We need to commit to bold action, which can move us swiftly right now into the possibility of a better future. This is the world that dozens of 50 by 30 supporters and local citizens in our region have been envisioning. It's also the vision illustrated in our 50 by 30 poster, which centers racial justice and economic justice alongside environmental sustainability. There's no shortage of positive visions of a more just, sustainable future here in our region. It's the will for bold action committed to the common good that will move us out of the crisis into making these better futures a reality. Next slide, please. So how the climate has changed and will keep changing. You've seen these graphs before. They're in all of the talking points for how urgent climate action is, and the warnings aren't new, just growing more urgent. Global CO2 levels are currently at 415 parts per million in the atmospheric concentrations worldwide, far above the recommended threshold of 350 parts per million to secure a safe and stable climate. We're already in overshoot. We are at approximately 1.3 degrees of climate change right now. If we continue on this trajectory, we'll see 4 degrees Celsius of climate change in Waterloo region. Children will live to see this temperature change. It's a completely new geological era in their lifetimes. Climate change isn't a future problem. It's a crisis that will play out over the course of children's lives. Our community will not be exempt from impacts.
Next. So change is happening. China and the US, the world's largest emitters, have committed to net zero by 2060 and 2050. Respectively, and the US has also committed to a 50 to 52% reduction by 2030. And of course, this will greatly accelerate the growth of the global clean economy that we can benefit from and contribute to by leading boldly. Just this month, the Netherlands legislated that Shell, one of the world's major fossil fuel producers, must reduce emissions 45% by 2030. Including emissions that come from using their products. We know we can decarbonize at a dramatic rate. Our region, as an innovation and tech leader, has every reason to lead the global push for decarbonization and benefit from this global transition.
Cities are also stepping up into major climate leadership roles. The C40 cities are a coalition of communities across the world that are tackling climate action at the municipal level. For example, Vancouver City Council is committed to a 50% reduction in greenhouse gases by 2030, and Halifax is committed to a 75% reduction by 2030, and that's only 10 years. And the future isn't just coming, it's speeding up. We must meet the climate crisis and our profoundly changing world at the speed the crisis demands. Because to quote Alex Stephan, a climate futurist, speed is justice. Every amount of carbon released matters. Every little bit of warming avoided reduces the risks of irreversible climate impacts, lessens devastation to vulnerable communities, reduces harm to the natural world, and means a more intact, safer planet we pass on to our children. Transform WR's report eloquently states that we are interdependent, that the people of Waterloo region need to work together for our collective well-being here and abroad. The carbon release here in Waterloo region does matter. Slide, please, new slide. So 2 quotes that are very close to my heart. So the future must be different than the past, and we must work together to influence our collective trajectory. 50 by 30 Waterloo region comes to the council with the certainty that your own courage can influence other municipalities in facing the climate crisis. As the world changes under the pressures of climate change and our efforts to mitigate it, there will emerge new opportunities to increase our climate goals, especially if council actively advocates to every level, the public, the business sector, the federal and provincial governments. We are all interdependent, and in recognizing our interconnectedness, we also recognize that the effort to mitigate the climate crisis isn't up to council alone. It will require active citizenship and advocacy from all of us. But what we are asking for is the courage to make good on the promise of the Climate Emergency Declaration from 2019 with actions that meet the scale of our climate emergency. We need 50% by 2030. New slide.
And actually, just one more slide forward.
Sorry, we messed up the slides.
We got one behind. One more slide forward. Thank you. This is just the end of the presentation. Obviously, it's a weighty vote we are asking you to consider. The right decision, in our view, is obvious at this moment in history when all of our futures are going to be shaped by our decisions today. We are supportive of the motion being brought forward by Councillor Henry, and we want to emphasize our movement is not going anywhere. We are here to call on Council to lead and emphasize we'll be here to back you up in the work to come. So that's why we wanted to end with this image from the shoe strike for climate justice in Waterloo Public Square featuring Mayor Jaworski. And it's a reminder of the power of local government partnering with local movements and groups to get work done. We know we live in a beautiful region. Let's keep it beautiful with bold climate action. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And essentially perfect timing, even coming in under. Very well done. And I think my spouse, my wife, still wonders where her work boots have went, but now you've just shown her on the screen. But so thank you for that. A wonderful presentation. What I would say as I look to council, see if they have any questions, I'd like to thank you, because as you heard in previous presentations, that communication is key. And it's certainly municipalities, elected officials, politicians can tell people things, but it really happens at the grassroots, in our streets, in our neighborhoods, in our square. So I really appreciate you being able to motivate people. And I think our next thing is to get them to motivate other people. I know the cause today is certainly Transform Waterloo Region, but as we move on, we need everybody to make changes for us to get that needed 50%. I do not see any questions from council, but thank you very much for presenting today, and thank you very much for what you have done in motivating our community.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Next up, we move into the registrants who came a bit later and have a total of 5 minutes to present. First up is Bruce Taylor, representative of Enviro Stewards, Inc.
Oh, yes. There's slide deck there? Yes. So in the interest of time, I'll move on to the next slide. So the purpose of my presentation is I want to just kind of outline an affordable, practical path to get to some of these objectives that have been presented, but also to outline a few landmines that can actually derail the process. If you could go to the next slide, please. So Enviro Stewards is a 20-year-old company. There are about 16 of us just north of Waterloo in Elmira. We're the only Canadian company to get a global SDG award. We received the top in every category measured by B Corp. Next slide. So part of our work, we use part of our profits to do development work in East Africa. And top right, that's our TED Talk. If you're interested, it's on YouTube. Coincidentally, Mayor Jaworski is the only person in the lobby when I walked off the stage because he was rushing off to something. So we had a bit of a chat then. So you may recall that. But this brings climate justice. So basically with climate justice, everybody knows that the developed world, us, created the problem. What they don't know is the developed world solutions actually prohibit benefiting people in the developed world who are suffering from climate change. For example, we put solar panels on a roof in an orphanage in South Sudan. We get twice the daylight. We shut off a whole generator that they were running, but there's no credit because it's not on our own roof in Elmira where we get half the daylight. Or those water filters you see there, they can actually provide safe water for 25 years. They avoid deforestation of boil water, but we can't actually sell them because people here aren't allowed to buy them because, our misunderstanding of local. You can actually act locally to help somebody else in a different country. But anyway, next slide, please. This is just the other part of our work is our paying work, where we work with facilities to reduce energy in the first place. So say Maple Leaf Foods is the first major food company in the world to be climate neutral, carbon neutral. And we got them there in 2019 by assessing 35 factories. So it's just to show that it's actually possible. And they're actually saving millions of dollars per year. Okay. And so don't wait for 2030, 2050. This stuff is possible now. And that's one of the goals. Next slide. This is just our path to get there. I won't go into it. It's on our blog if you want. But basically, where are you now? If you go to a mall, you look, where are you now? You know where you want to go. You identify a path to get there, and then you implement it, verify it, that kind of thing. So next slide. So this is on the climate action 4 and 5. Here's a landmine you need to avoid. So 1/3 of all the food is wasted. If as a country, be the 3rd largest greenhouse gas emitter after China and States would be food loss. In Canada, it's 49 billion. Now, 100% of the effort in Canada is how do we divert that from landfill so it doesn't turn into methane gas? If you succeed at diverting 100%, you still waste 1/3 of the food. Still the third largest greenhouse gasser, still lose almost all that 49 billion. The only way to not do that is to not waste it in the first place. Keep it as food. If you could go to the next slide, please. So here's some work we did with Campbell's in Toronto. First, we did water and energy. We found them 1.6 million per year of water and energy they didn't have to waste, right? Then we found them $700,000 of food that didn't have to be lost in the first place. And their diversion number went down because we were already diverting it. So it actually looked worse on those metrics, but it's 4,000 tons less greenhouse gas because we get back what was spent in the supply chain before it even got to Campbell's. And then the other thing to keep in mind is job protection. So we were implementing this stuff, but partway through they decided, okay, we're closing the factory and moving the production to the States. The biggest competitor is your own company somewhere else, and you have to embed this efficiency or it's gone. So we went on, we did 50 factories across Canada, including a few in Waterloo region. We found 230,000 per factory of food that didn't have to be wasted in the first place. And each factory would save $350 for every ton of carbon they avoid in their supply chain by doing it as prevention. So don't look at diversion, look at preventing it in the first place. Next slide. With climate change, the leading insurance claim in Canada is flooding, and it's doubled in the last decade because of climate change. We're getting more frequent storms more often. So the conventional approach is let's dig up all the roads like they're doing, ironically, right outside my office right now to put in larger storm pipes. Instead, I want to show you what we're doing with our own office. Go to the next slide. So we're Sustainable Waterloo Region members. We've reduced the greenhouse gas by 78% per employee. We're a tenant even. We've cut our outside air 97% by using a living wall to take the carbon dioxide out of our office. We're harvesting rainwater for the roof. We haven't bought water in 5 years for that wall. So this month we're building a blue roof on our roof where we're actually going to store the first 2 inches of every rainfall on our roof. And what that'll do is that we can now tile our toilets in there also. But if you go to the next slide, it's interesting. A week ago Friday, I put up on the roof because we're replacing it. And so on our tar and gravel, it was 30 Celsius outside. The tar part was 60 Celsius. The new white part right beside it was 40 Celsius because it was white. A bucket of water on my roof was only 20 Celsius. So if we start evaporating rainwater from our roof, we're actually going to probably shut off our air conditioner. So we have an amp logger on our air conditioner. We're going to measure that to make sure it works or not. But anyway, it's going to reduce the demand. It's going to reduce the flooding risk by capturing stormwater. So you don't have to take somebody's property, put a pond and all that kind of stuff. And so I want to just illustrate these multiple wins. And in addition to that, we can get twice the R value with the installation when we replace it. The color is going to cut in half, that kind of thing. So next slide. So this is the last.
To summarize. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, this is my last slide actually. The final one is, if you go for low price bidding, it's actually the most expensive thing you can do. So you see this Pegasus meets the spec, right? 4 legs, 2 wings. And what happens is if you go for low price bidding, you're going to get what you've always got, because the only way to win that is if you design what you've always designed. So London declared a climate emergency. I looked at their plan. On an arena, they were going to put air-to-air heat pumps to pump heat from London into the arena. Well, that's great, but you're already running a heat pump to pump heat from the ice pad outside. Why don't we use that heat instead? But you have to take this step back to take a look at the system as a holistic thing. And so that's what I want to encourage you is, procurement is something under your control. And if you procure based on low cost, you're not going to achieve your ends. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. I think your last slide is going to haunt me tonight in my dreams. But it was very good. A lot of great points about what we need to do. And as you know, Tracy Bell of our head of procurement is certainly listening and tuned into this. I'll just look to my counselors to see if we have any questions. And we don't at this time, but we know where to reach you, Bruce, because you're out in the community, and I do look forward to seeing you again once we're all unwrapped here and ready to go out and see people and keep up the good work with inspiring people. I think that's your story that you have there is something that will make each individual wake up in the morning and maybe do things a little bit differently.
Perfect. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Our next guest is either Guy or Guy Brodsky, a resident of Waterloo.
Yep, it's Guy.
Guy, hi Guy. You have 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, so I don't have too much prepared, so I'll try to keep it short. I'm a resident of Waterloo. I'm an undergrad at the University of Waterloo, so I'm also a student and a member of our youth here. And as such, I really do think that we need as much and as bold climate action as possible. With that said, I would just like to support the council in endorsing or passing the Transform WR report, as well as the amendment to also take in principle the goal of actually achieving 50% by 2030. And I also kind of just wanted to speak on a few more things. I wanted to say that I appreciate the endorsement of the natural gas phase out in Ontario. I think that's a really good further initiative and further recognition of the fact that we kind of need action on multiple different scales and jurisdictions. I also appreciate that there's a high consideration of equity in our climate plan, and I would love to see that moving forward. And then I also kind of just wanted to bring to the attention of council, I would just recommend the council considers also endorsing the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. For those that don't know, it's a great treaty that is sort of styled after the Nuclear Weapons Non-Proliferation Treaty, that refers to the impact of fossil fuels such as oil, coal, and onwards. And I would just like to sort of suggest that as a consideration moving forward. But yeah, apart from that, great presentations and great work to everyone involved, as well as the previous delegates. And I yield my time. Thank you.
Excellent. Well done with your time, Guy. Thank you very much for weighing in as behalf of as a student and certainly a citizen of Waterloo. That's always very much appreciated because we hope to gain a broad insight through our delegate process. I'll just look to council to see what we have. I do not see any questions for you. Thank you very much for your time and for your presentation today, Guy. Next up, our next guest is Elisa McClurg, representative of KW Urban Harvesters.
Hello,
Council. Hi there,
Council.
Lisa.
Hi. I'm presenting today on behalf of my garden group, KW Urban Harvester. Next slide. This group, which was formed in 2006, is focused on transforming urban spaces into anything sustainably edible, preserving the harvest, and saving the seeds. Next slide. Just some pictures showing what we've been up to since then. Next slide. Producing food and building community. Next slide. Since the pandemic, we have stepped up our efforts from just community gardening. Next slide. To starting a Grow a Row program that encourages people to grow a row or a messy patch, however they garden, for those in need in the community. Next slide. And this is just a slide showing some of the produce that was donated to food organizations last year as a result of our efforts. Next slide. We also started a very small yard share program to further boost food production. Next slide. One that matches those with yard space with those who need spaces to garden. So, and we're hoping to expand this very, very shortly. Next slide. Our dream this year is to donate 5,000 bags of produce to the community, and those people can either be the gardeners themselves or others in the community, either through food agencies or just giving the food directly to those who need it. Next slide. And while what I'm talking about may seem just like making changes around food, our dreams are actually bigger than that. The tagline we have on our website is to also dissolve the pavement, reimagine the turf, and repurpose unneeded structures to grow food. And we have this dream because radically increasing our urban food production, we would not only reduce food miles, but also further localize and make more resilient the economy overall. This would be amplified, as we have been doing, by building community through gardening, creating a more caring and sharing community. To do this, to boost food production, we would need not only to reimagine the turf, but also to reduce, dissolve pavement, as we would need far fewer roads and even built infrastructure created to support the current economic model. Infrastructure which instead could be repurposed to produce food. These are changes too that require much less external financial input than some other projects from government and such, but rather would rely largely on enlisting the support of our community. While what I'm describing may sound like outlandish dreams, given the multiple crises we face with the changing climate, etc., we need radical change. Through our involvement in the local food movement, we have seen people's willingness to step up and help KW Urban Harvester and other food organizations. For this and so many other reasons, we believe strongly that our community is capable of far more than we have thought possible. With all this in mind, while we at Urban Harvester greatly appreciate and commend the hard work of Climate Action Waterloo Region, we stand with 50 by 2030 in the request that the commitment go further to what the science is saying we need to do and is in line with the Paris Agreement, to a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Next slide. Of course, we would like to ask people to consider getting involved in Kitchener KW Urban Harvester, or any gardening group for that matter. Next slide. More importantly than that even, and I'm speaking now more personally, I would like to ask that we consider taking seriously the needs of our children. Children like my daughter, who confided in me the other day that she's worried she won't have a future. That doesn't take away the, yes, similar stories have been shared by many other parents. That doesn't take away the pain of hearing it. I ask us all, not only the ones here in this meeting, but others as well in our community. Let's not rob our children of our future. Let's not assume radical changes are just outlandish dreams to be quickly dismissed. Let's instead show our children that we are committed towards their future. Let us work as a community to make the seemingly impossible become possible. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your presentation and certainly introducing the community to KW Urban Harvester for whoever who hasn't been familiar with that. I'll just look to my council to see if there's any questions at this time. And I will turn over to Councillor Bonigar. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor Jaworski. I just wanted to say a quick thank you for coming to talk to us today, and also thank you for the work you're doing. Before I moved to Waterloo, I was living in Toronto, and I was part of an urban farming group there. And I learned a lot, and I brought that here with me. And I just want to thank you for not just kind of supporting the urban food growth, but also education for people on how to grow food in their city. So thank you, and keep it up.
Thanks very much. I appreciate that. Maybe we can learn from your experience.
My thumbs are not exactly
you just
green.
signed up for something.
Sounds great.
Excellent. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll go to our next guest, Shirley Irish, resident of Waterloo, who also has 5 minutes. We'll just wait for the presentation to get switched up here.
I don't have a oops. What's going on? I don't have a... What?
I'm just wondering if you've joined by two different ways, perhaps, Shirley?
I thought I just a minute, yeah. Okay, is that better? Oh. Now I don't know.
If you mute your speaker, you will not get feedback that way, and you won't be able to hear it, but we'll certainly be able to hear you.
But I don't have... I'm just using my phone. So now I'm...
1 minute, we'll just check on something on our side to see if there's anything we can do.
Shirley, can I get you just to speak for a moment? Shirley, can I get you just to do a sound check again for a moment? We're just going to see if you're connected twice.
So will I turn off my phone? Yes. Yeah. Is that right? Can you hear me now? No. So you can't hear me. Okay.
Okay, I think you can go ahead.
I'm on my phone, or at least, can you hear me now?
Yeah, we are not getting any feedback at this time.
Yeah, okay. Sorry about that. I had to use, okay, it's all right. My name's Shirley Irish. I'm a citizen of Waterloo. I live across the road from City Hall, actually. I came to Waterloo in '57 when my husband was an early hire at the so-called Waterloo College and Associate Faculties, which became the engineering school, and very soon became the University of Waterloo. And the population at that time was 16,000, and there were no apartment buildings available. I've watched over these 60 years with some pride as the city continues to grow, along with the university. And as others have said, we are now at a critical point in the life of the city and the world, because the changing climate threatens life, especially human life. A lot of people have spoken about the 50 by 30, and I just wanted to emphasize that the C40 Cities Initiative, that is a network of the world's megacities, all committed to addressing climate change and supporting other cities in collaborating effectively to share the knowledge and drive meaningful, measurable, and sustainable climate action. That group of C40 includes 97 of the world's biggest cities, representing more than 700 million people worldwide and a quarter of the global economy. All members have committed to the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement. So no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius, which means if they're serious, they're also committing to 50 by 30. Mayors of these cities have emerged as strong champions of the kind of ambitious climate action the world needs. Cities know what needs to be done, and they know that achieving this climate-safe future is only possible if we act now and in collaboration with other levels of government, business, civil society, and citizens. David Miller, who used to be a mayor in Toronto, wrote a book called Solved, and that outlines stories of some of those cities, these C40 cities, who have done just that. It takes courage to lead to zero carbon in the time needed. So we need to act faster and with more urgency than ever before. You all know that, and you're all working towards that with this strategy. So I urge the City of Waterloo and the region to become a part of this progressive push. The graph on page 13 of the Transform Waterloo Region strategy shows that transportation and buildings are the sources of most of our emissions. Therefore, those two require the sharpest decline. So you need to insist that all new buildings aim for zero emission by 2050. I notice a lot of new buildings going up, and I'm wondering, have they been, is this sort of thing been assigned for them? So encourage travel by foot, bicycle, and public transit. Therefore, more infrastructure is needed. Car owners may complain, but presumably they want a healthy climate too. As a spoiler alert, I do own a car, a Prius, which is used once or twice a week, except when I go on long distance trips. Just like COVID-19, the climate emergency is already impacting health and will escalate in severity without action. So Ty showed us that graph showing what we have to do. So while building a greener future, we can and must also build a future that is fairer and more caring of all, because it's both clearly the right thing to do and will also give us collectively the best chance at surviving and thriving together in a changed climate future. The best climate solutions also care for and are created in partnership with the people who most impacted by climate change and are grounded in guiding principles of equity and justice. Equitable solutions in turn build community and the social infrastructure needed to be stronger, more caring, interconnected, and more resilient in the face of climate changes to come. So this means that passing this strategy today and working towards that amendment to strive towards a science-based goal of 50% reduction by 30 needs to be done today. Thank you.
It took us a while to get started there, Shirley, but I must say congratulations and well done. In your 5 minutes, you covered a lot of ground and a lot of heartfelt ground, and certainly a big shout out to your family for helping start our second university, which has made us to the community that we are today. So thank you very much for that. I'll just look to councillors to see if we have any questions for Shirley. I don't see any, Shirley, but thank you very much, and thank you for your patience in waiting to do your delegation today.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Councillor Bonnegar, do you still want to say something? I just missed that.
Thank you, Mayor. Just as ward councillor, I was going to ask, thank Shirley for coming on today and taking the time to be with us. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, for sure, Councillor.
Thank you. You're welcome. I left out a lot because I realized that the other people had covered a lot of my points, but no. Thank you.
Well, you win the prize for coming in exactly on time. So we'll make sure Councillor Bonnegar gets you a little something, whether it be a zucchini or a certificate or something.
Oh, by the way, the church, First United Church is starting a garden in our property for public use. So that's a new project.
Excellent. It will be a wonderful addition to Uptown. Thank you, Shirley.
Bye-bye.
Next up, I'd like to bring in Stephanie Gertz, representative of Food System Roundtable of Waterloo Region.
Hello, thank you. Good afternoon, through you, Mayor Jaworski. So the COVID-19 pandemic is disrupting rural and urban food systems worldwide, posing a number of challenges for cities and local governments that are obliged to deal with the rapid changes in food availability, accessibility, and affordability. The pandemic has exposed the fragility of our global food systems, and many families are experiencing food insecurity. Food insecurity in Canada is expected to double from the most recent statistics of 4.4 million people. Due to COVID-19, we're already seeing a doubling, if not in some cases tripling, in the use of area food banks. Food security is improved when the region increases its capacity to feed people. As money and other resources become scarce, access to low-cost, fresh, minimally processed food becomes increasingly important. We're seeing a return to the gardening and market garden production in the region's residential areas in attempts to build resilience to social and ecological shocks. Climate models show that Canada's agricultural regions will likely see drier summers, but increased winter and spring precipitations with very intense rainfall events. Climate change is bringing new extremes beyond anything we're used to managing. Water supply and water management are fundamental for farming. There are also several possible effects climate change could have on crops for pests and disease. We also have been shown that just-in-time food chains are vulnerable to disruptions. We need to build better sustainable food system resilience. Waterloo Region food and agricultural can play a key role in reducing emissions. We now have a chance to build on many innovations in sustainable agriculture and food distribution. By growing food using ecological methods, food production can regenerate air, water, soil, and biodiversity, and conserve healthy forests, wetlands, and waterways. Our agricultural and food system can be a pioneer in developing solutions to help us reach 50 by 30. One topic that was only briefly mentioned in the report was the benefits of using agricultural land as a way to sequester carbon. Mark Russer, Vice President of Ontario Federation of Agriculture, as well as our local chapter, has stated that agriculture and forestry are two of the top industries that can have a major impact on carbon sequestering, but they're often overlooked and undervalued. You not only need to look at forestry within the rural areas, but there's urban forests as well that should be built upon. On the Transform Waterloo Region report, it states the fifth transformational change is needed to have thriving local food system built on local farming and food production and processing that feeds much of the community by 2050. It states, a significant way to reduce emissions caused by the food we eat is to make sure our food is close to home. A locally based food system is also more resilient, as we are less reliant on supply chains from other parts of the world and less vulnerable to change or shocks in these systems. The Transform report states that the Waterloo Region has been a long-time leader in development and implementation of land use planning protections for prime agricultural land. However, but from my experience and many others I've talked to, we still need to do much more. Massive amount of land are still being lost and rezoned for other purposes. And this land will unlikely that this will ever be returned back to prime farmland. According to the Ontario Federation of Agriculture, over the last 10 years, Ontario has lost farmland at a rate of 175 acres a day, the equivalent of 5 family farms each week. And many of you guys don't realize, but only 5% of Ontario's land is usable for agriculture, and only a small fraction of that is prime farmland. We also need to look at increasing urban food options, which should be a priority as our climate and access to healthy food are struggling. This is as mentioned above with increased demand at local food banks. The Food System Roundtable believes that we need to be striving for a 50% reduction by 2030 in order to ensure we take the necessary measures to protect our food system. There needs to be an urgency. We need to start putting the systems in place now, since it will take years to have a finished process. We need to protect the climate to protect our futures, and that means we need to push the limits of what we think is possible. Some of you may have heard this before, but we need to think bigger. If the thought doesn't make you feel uncomfortable, then you're not thinking big enough. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And I'll just look to councillors to see if there's any questions. And I'm seeing none. Again, thank you for your delegation today. I think this will certainly set the stage for Transform Waterloo Region and all the regional municipalities locally moving forward.
Thank you.
I will now bring up, as we see here, Henriette Thompson, representative of Faith Climate Justice Network, and who also has 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm presenting as a co-organizer of Faith Climate Justice, a regional network of faith communities that emerged in late 2019. We currently represent faith communities from Jewish, Hindu, and Christian traditions. Interfaith Grand River and Christians Together Waterloo region have also joined the Faith Climate Justice Network. We continue to grow and welcome members of all faiths and people of goodwill. Next slide, please. As people of faith resident in this region, we advocate excuse me, for a sustainable low carbon economy that generates prosperity for all. Through collective action, we strive to ensure that no one is left behind or on the sidelines. We see our role as bringing a faith perspective to the broader work of climate justice in the community. And we acknowledge the wisdom that Indigenous peoples on the Haldeman Tract and in the Great Lakes region bring to the care of the whole creation, that in quote, all my relations means all human and non-human relationships. Next slide, please. As Onondaga Elder Oren Lyons says, in the absence of the sacred, nothing is sacred. Everything is for sale. Next slide, please. Faith Climate Justice pivoted its work during COVID, and we have been active in the following ways. We hold open dialogues for faith leadership for climate justice, and we've had 3 of those so far this year. 10 faith communities are hosting and posting the climate justice banners. You saw the design on the cover slide, and they are beautifully designed by Heather Lee and Abi Dewan. And there has been lots of local media coverage as various faith communities have taken these banners and hung them on their buildings or in front of their buildings. We started faith climate justice working groups in areas such as values and principles, network building and partnerships, decolonizing and anti-racism, faith community resources and capacity buildings, including with children and youth, strategy, organizing, and policy advocacy. We're supporting new participants in hosting worship services and starting new dialogues. And finally, we're planning delegations to local councils, which is why we are here today. The next slide, please. Our request, our recommendation is fairly simple. We urge Waterloo City Council to accept and implement the Transform Waterloo Region Climate Action Strategy, which is long in the making and with broad community consultation, but as a critical starting point for strategic and operational action in Waterloo Region. Now is the time for our communities' councils to actively implement this local strategy. But we're also aware that due to the need for even greater urgent action, Faith Climate Justice advocates for a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. And this is a target in line with climate science, as we have heard this afternoon. Final slide, please. So let us all work together in hope and action for the sake of the whole inhabited sacred earth. Thank you for listening.
Well done, Henriette. I'm not sure if, I know this is probably certainly the first presentation on Transform Waterloo Region for Faith Climate Justice, but if this is your first presentation to a council, certainly very well done. Great presentation, succinct, to the point, and I like the quote from Oren as well there. So thank you very much for that. I'll just look to my councillors to see if there's any questions. Hearing and seeing none. Again, thank you very much, Henriette.
Thank you very much.
And our last delegation for this topic, resident of Waterloo, Leslie Johnston, who registered and also has 5 minutes to join us today.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be able to be here today. So yes, I'm a resident of Waterloo and a PhD candidate at the University of Waterloo in Public Health and a longtime member of Fossil Free UW, which is one of the University of Waterloo's climate action groups. I'm also a proud aunt of 2 7-year-olds, so happy birthday today, Noah and Parker. The work that can be done here could be your most important birthday gift. Just putting that out there. So this is actually a really exciting week for Waterloo. Today we have this important vote, but also tomorrow, the University of Waterloo Board of Governors will be voting on adopting its climate neutral investment policy. In going beyond divestment, this strategy features several ambitious climate targets. Number one, a 50% reduction in carbon emissions by 2030. Number two, a 100% carbon neutrality achievement in both its pension and endowment funds by 2040. Number three, no material positions in fossil fuel exploration and extraction companies by 2025. This is on top of UW's declaration of a climate emergency and its adoption of a climate and energy action plan to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. So though we students are busy preparing for the vote tomorrow, I'm actually a few minutes late for a meeting, I'm here today to voice my strong support for Transform Waterloo Region's climate action strategy. As a Waterloo resident for more than 6 years, I want to start out by saying thank you. Thank you all for your work and your commitment demonstrated in this important report. I am so thrilled to see my city taking leadership with this strategy and the important equity and justice focused commitments that have come along with it. I would like to see everyone here today say yes to this strategy and then and to this effort. And my and is a request, as many have already stated, to include the commitment in principle to meet the science-based targets to reduce local emissions by 50% by 2030. It is essential if we are to preserve a climate-safe future. Climate change is already impacting our region, as we've heard, and the world, with far worse impacts expected to come without bold science-based action. As has already been stated, I recognize that we can't do this alone, and it is absolutely necessary that we be advocates when we engage with the province and federal government. We as a community are here to back you up, our municipal leaders. As I mentioned earlier, I am a doctoral candidate in public health. While we have all been working so hard to meet the challenge of the COVID crisis, the disruption of this current moment will be overwhelmed by the impact of the climate emergency. Canadian public health practitioners are already seeing the impacts of climate change on the health of people in Canada and around the world. So I wanted to share just this quick reading from the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment's recent report to the federal government. So much of what they have to say, I think, are also warnings that we need to hear. So they write, climate change is the greatest health challenge of the 21st century. Climate change is worsening asthma and evacuations from wildfires. It's increasing deaths from heat waves, making allergy seasons longer and more severe, posing challenges to food security, hastening the spread of Lyme disease, and raising the potential for new pandemics. Impacts are being felt first and worst in Canada's far north, and by women, children, racialized individuals, and Indigenous peoples. A recent study out of Harvard University estimated that 18% of premature deaths globally are due to fossil fuel-related air pollution. Health Canada recently reported that 15,300 people died in Canada of air pollution in 2016. Also, impacts from health and health systems are expected to be catastrophic by the time today's infants are in their 60s and my nephews are 67. This is why flattening the greenhouse gas emission curves must be viewed as being as critical to a healthy population as is bending the curve on COVID-19. This is why local actions like our Transform Waterloo Region report with additional commitments to 50 by 30 are imperative. We must all commit to ambitious and just action to preserve our health, our beautiful region, and to do our part for our planetary health. So today I'm asking you, please choose to be the leaders we need you to be. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie, and thanks to you and Jody for sending me part of my Board of Governors Council package early last week to make sure I was well read on that one topic. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
Yeah, and if I thought you just give me a new idea, I think in future council meetings we'll do birthday shout outs every 10-15 minutes, so people have to tune in to see if they get one. So happy birthday to your nephews there. I'll just look to see if there's any others. Yeah, I don't see any questions from my councillors. And if it was an in-person Board of Governors meeting tomorrow, I'm sure I would see you. But nonetheless, I'm trying to balance a bunch of things, so hopefully I'm at the vote for you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Look forward to seeing you online, I hope. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. And that is it for delegations on this topic. And we've certainly heard a lot for this. And what I think we might do is, yeah, why don't we pull up the motion with Councillor Henry's amendment. And there we go. So what I think we might want to do is potentially look to Councillor Henry and perhaps, I know Councillor Bonagor had worked on this, but Councillor Bodley is on the Sustainability Advisory Committee. So maybe look to those two for putting it on the table, and then we can see where we go with this and see if we can get support.
Well, Mayor, Councillor Henry here. I'm happy to move the motion as printed, including the amendment on the screen. And after it attracts a seconder, I'd be happy to speak to it.
Thank you. I'll look to Councillor Bodley.
Mayor Jaworski, just in deference to Councillor Bonagor, I'm going to let her second it, but I appreciate you reaching out to me. I'll let Councillor Bonagor do that. Okay,
well, you and I will still have a chance to vote on it, so I'll look to Councillor Bonagor to consider seconding.
Thank you, Councillor Bodley and Mayor Jaworski. Yes, thank you. I was working on this with Councillor Henry, and I appreciate the opportunity to second this. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, we have it on the table. Councillor Henry, do you want me to come back to you now, or do you want to go later?
I'm happy to go now.
Okay, please go ahead. And for anybody else, if you can put your hand up in the panel, that would be good, and we'll come around. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to all of the delegates who have taken the time to join us today. I add that thanks to the thanks I've already provided to the Transform WR team that has been working so hard for 2 years to be able to bring this plan through the community and to councils. It is an immense amount of work, and this is the first of many, I hope, very auspicious, momentous and critical days as this plan goes before councils across the region. I think it is hard to understate how important the motion that's before us today and the strategy that's before us today is for the future that we're all trying to build for all of us, so that all of us can have the kind of equitable, prosperous, sustainable world that our parents and grandparents were able to experience. Our world necessarily is going to be different. It's already changing in ways that we need to work hard to arrest and correct. But it's also changing in ways that give us all great hope that we can have a future that looks better tomorrow than it did today, because we are working together to build that future for ourselves, for our children, for our grandchildren, for everybody that comes after. And that starts here in Waterloo Region, with all of us rolling up our sleeves together to take transformative actions that will change the way we move, the way we build and operate our spaces, the way we produce, consume, and waste, and the ways that we relate to one another. These are big moves. These are big changes. They will require that we help people get unstuck. Folks told us in the consultation that they felt stuck. when they looked at the future and they looked at today and they didn't know how to get there. This is the path to get there. The calls to action are strong. They will require our dedication and our commitment, and they will change a lot of how we live our lives. And it will do so for the better. Once we get unstuck, once we start moving, once we think about how we do things differently, and once our systems that we helped set up are transformed to allow us to make those decisions and those changes easy, we will get there and we will find a better world for having done it. This is something that, you know, I think all of us have experienced and will experience in our own ways. You know, personally, there have been a lot of changes that I know I and my family have experienced in the last year, as you and your families have experienced and will experience in the years ahead. Some things I've learned this year is that, you know, the time that we spend together is precious. It can be exhausting, but it is absolutely a foundation for, you know, togetherness and connection and belonging that I valued, and I hope that many others are able to value and build on in the years ahead. We've tried new things. We've had to try new things to do things differently. You know, we have in my household for almost a year now been biking our weekly groceries back from the store. Not several trips a week, but one trip for all of the groceries in our household has been on the back of my bike. I never thought that that would be something I would do. I wasn't sure that that was something possible to do. Took a bit of practice, but it's actually fairly easy to do. And the one reason why is that we've built, as a city and a region, the infrastructure around where I live and where I get my groceries, that it feels safe for me to do that. And there was a few extra meters of multi-use trail on Weber Street that closed the last gap in my trip up to my grocery store just in the past year. That needs to be true for everybody. If most trips are going to be taken using active transportation with the support of public transportation, that's got to be true for everybody in the region. That's something that we need to work on, and we are working on. That's something we need to coordinate at a region-wide level. We need to make this possible for everyone, and that's a huge move. You know, our building in replacing our aging 1980s furnaces and air conditioning, replace them with air source heat pumps. That's something that everybody needs to be able to move to. They need to be able to have the energy efficient homes to be able to make that possible and viable. To reduce how much energy they need, but that's something that everybody needs to be able to do. And we have to help transform the systems and provide the supports to help people make those momentous choices. These are two small examples of some of the transformative changes that will make a healthier, more sustainable, more connected world in our community. And if you want to read more, it's in the plan. It's absolutely in the plan, and we need everybody to be part of it. In terms of the amendment I'm making today, what I wanted to do here, and I'm happy to have had Councillor Bonagor's help with this and the support and advice of many in our community, including the 50 by 30 campaign team, to be able to pull out what we know we need to do in the next 10 years to be able to drive that target, and to make sure that we've made explicit that with the support of federal and provincial action, that's our target. It's not just the 30% that we can achieve under today's federal and provincial policy with bold and significant local action. It's that we know we need to reach this higher target. And as policies change, our target is already clear. So that's something that I've wanted to include today that enhances our strategy. Our strategy are the right actions, and our ability to hit those numbers is a lot easier with support from the federal and provincial government. There's a key action in here that municipalities will leave on creating the agenda and the advocacy agenda that is coordinated, cohesive, collective, and achieves a consensus on what our asks are, and will be critical to be able to actually secure what we need from provincial and federal governments. And on that front, this council's already acted in asking for a net zero electricity grid from the province by 2030. Simply that change, that one change from the province would take our actions from 30% to 40%. So that shows what kind of help can come from elsewhere to drive and help power the local action, the significant local action, even further to achieve the targets that we need. I'm proud of this plan. I'm proud of the people that have worked on this plan. And I would like to put that call out, that call to action to every organization, business, public sector, nonprofits, every citizen, every resident, no matter where you're from and what you can do, to roll up your sleeves and come together and put this plan into action to move it forward so that we can achieve the world that we need to, the better world that we require for all of our citizens and all of those who are yet to come and grow into this world. So with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues.
Excellent, and we will pass the baton to Councillor Bonagor. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. This plan is strong, but it's painfully clear that this alone is not enough. Science tells us that we must act swiftly and decisively as a city, as a region, as a province, and as a country. So I support this plan. It is a great plan, and I support its 30% interim goal. But that must be couched within that broader context. Like, we must call on and work with the provincial and federal governments to close the gap between the 30% we can achieve here and the greater reductions that we must achieve. The real change is urgent now, and we each have a role to play. But as delegates said earlier, and as you said yourself, Mayor, like, this doesn't have to be a story about loss. This is a story of gain, and a healthier future is possible if we work for it together. So that's why I am very pleased to see this report, to endorse this report. And while I am in my advocating shoes, and while we are discussing climate inequity, I'd also like to take this opportunity to encourage the region to consider making public transit free for children aged 12 and under, as an important support for families and a step towards lower cost transit for all, so that we can start making these really big moves. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Councillor Bonagor. I will now turn the floor over to Councillor Freeman. Please go ahead.
Sorry, I was just trying to get unmuted. Thank you very much. I just wanted to build on some of the comments that that Councillor Bonagor and Councillor Henry said. And climate change is absolutely urgent. It's urgent that every single individual is truly called to action. I'm thankful that we are going to look to partnering and advocating to higher levels of government. But this strategy, and more broadly, I will say that across this country, Waterloo region has been a real leader as it relates to climate change. And I appreciate that the report even makes reference back to the work with the Partners in Climate program with FCM back in the 90s. The region of Waterloo has been working hard to take this serious, protecting things like the moraine and our groundwater resources. But we have to look at every decision through that lens of climate change. Big decisions, small decisions, individual decisions, community decisions. The decision for an individual to get on their bicycle like Councillor Henry does and get his groceries at the mall and drive home, that's an individual choice that he has made to set aside the emissions from fuel burning equipment. And that's where we have to get to. We have to get to a place where every single citizen is willing to say, I am willing to commit to reducing my greenhouse gas footprint in all that I do. And if that means shifting to a cleaner burning fuel at the, as part of industry changes, house changes and so on, and then ultimately getting to that net zero, we each have to strive to do that. And I agree, this plan is great, and I'm so thankful for the community input into this plan. The community input, to my opinion, is the transformational piece that happened here in Waterloo region through the work of Sustainable WR and Reap Grain Solutions and all of the individuals who had a willingness to contribute to this strategy. The city staff that worked on this have worked on it tirelessly, and I'm so thankful for all of that. But like I say, it's going to come down to that call to action, and individuals are absolutely a part of that piece. They cannot expect government alone to be the drivers of change.
Thank you, Councillor Freeman. I do not see any other hands up, so just me pause to make sure I'm correct on that. And as we move forward towards the vote, I'm getting certainly positive vibes from everyone on this, and it's great to see the community support. Often that is not the case, but to see all these new and or more grassroots groups come out, support the plan, the Transform Waterloo Region plan, to support the brand new clause that I think was universally supported. You know, I think it's just a great day for Waterloo Region as we then take this and pass the baton to our colleagues throughout the municipality, throughout the region, to also consider this and to vote to support this transformational plan that we have here today, put together by the thousands and thousands of hours that's gone into it. But certainly my thanks to Anna Marie, Mary Jane, and Tova for bringing this forward, going back an hour and a bit now. And with that, I will call the vote, beginning with Ward 1.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillor Hanmer is very pleased and proud to support this motion, voting in favor.
Councillor Bodley in favor.
Councillor Veith in favor.
Councillor Freeman in favor.
Councillor Vasic in favor, and thanks for the amendments and the work you put into that.
Councillor Henry in favor.
Councillor Bonagor in favor.
And the mayor's in favor too, and I don't think I've been any more pleased to say that passes unanimously. So well done, team. Well done, everyone. I feel like we should be throwing our council packets in the air, but unfortunately, most of them are on PDF, so we can't do that. And there is more work to do, not only in climate change, but on 11B. So with that, we will move forward and go to the Union Street East reconstruction report prepared for us by Gavin Vermeer, and Gavin does have apparently a short presentation.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Jaworski and members of Council. The following presentation provides supplementary information for the Union Street Road reconstruction project focused on the implementation of cycling infrastructure. Next slide, please. To start, I'll briefly recap the project work to date. The need to reconstruct Union Street was identified by the city's asset management system due to the deterioration of surface and underground infrastructure. The replacement of underground infrastructure includes the replacement of water main, some of which is over 100 years old, replacement of storm sewers, which is undersized, and sanitary sewer. In 2020, we started the design process by retaining an experienced engineering consultant, Walter Fady, to prepare conceptual options for new cycling facilities. These conceptual options were presented to the public via Engage Waterloo. Staff and the consultant then evaluated the options based on a number of factors, including public input, and at the January 2021 council meeting recommended that alternative 1B, the on-road race cycle tracks, be implemented. However, per council's request for a second review of the feasibility of an in-boulevard cycling facility, an additional concept labeled alternative 3 has been prepared and evaluated. Based on a comprehensive review of alternative 3 and its substantial additional cost, staff reaffirmed the recommendation for alternative 1B. Next slide, please. The alternative 3 concept was included as attachment C in the staff report. Staff are not aware of any in-boulevard facilities having been implemented within Waterloo Region. However, the photos on the slide show similar facilities in other municipalities. Due to increased space requirement, a number of full property acquisitions would be required and an additional number of trees would be lost. Based on appraisals of the properties required, staff estimate that the project will require an additional $9 to $11 million for property acquisition, though some funding could be recouped following completion of the project by selling unneeded portions of the acquired properties. Staff and the consultant identified a number of safety issues with Alternative 3 as well, and therefore we engaged a third party with special expertise, True North Safety, to review both Alternative 1B and Alternative 3. Based on the conceptual design, sight lines, anticipated cyclist types, anticipated roadway operating conditions, and other factors, True North Safety recommended Alternative 1B. If Alternative 3 were to be implemented, the cycling facilities would be isolated for a number of years, as the City of Kitchener's Cycling and Trails Master Plan indicates they will not be ready for a connection west of King for at least 20 years. Connections east of Moore are identified in Waterloo's recently approved TMP as a medium-term goal, but timing is yet to be determined. At present, staff view Alternative 3 as a cost-prohibitive option, though it is desirable long-term, or is a desirable long-term vision that could conceivably be implemented within the next 15 to 20 years when the road becomes due for resurfacing. There are benefits to this approach. For example, this time frame would align with the implementation of cycling infrastructure in Kitchener, west of King Street. It is anticipated that much of the road will have redeveloped by then, providing the city the opportunity to acquire property through the site plan process and substantially decreasing costs. It is also anticipated that cycling infrastructure from Margaret to Moore will have been implemented. Given the rapid evolution of AT design, staff would be better able to integrate the design of revised cycling facilities between King and Moore with the facilities between Moore and Margaret and within Kitchener. Next slide, please. To summarize, given the physical and property constraints, staff recommend Alternative 1B as the best fit for the street. As an intermediate solution, it most reasonably balances cost and impacts on existing properties while still accomplishing the necessary renewal of important aged underground infrastructure and making significant improvements to active transportation along the corridor compared to existing conditions today. Alternative 1B also results in less tree loss and disruption to private property and can be modified in the future at an appropriate time. Next slide, please. That concludes the presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions council may have.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Gavin. And just to council, we do have a delegate here to speak to the this topic. I'll just pause for a second, Gavin, to see if anybody's hand goes up. And if, oh, there we go. Ward Councillor Bonagor, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Jaworski, and thank you, Gavin and the team, for all your work on this. I think I've told your bosses, but I haven't told you directly just how deeply I appreciate the time and effort and the very deep thought you put into all of the options and all of the many questions we threw your way. So first I want to say that's very much appreciated. I just have a couple of questions. So this plan, it deprioritizes cars. It's certainly a better environment for pedestrians. You've put forward what you are kind of recognizing as the best solution for the situation we have right now. I just have a question about bollards and the possible inclusion of separation bollards. I know that they're not possible along the full length, given the high number of driveways and the complexity of the location. I'm just wondering if you could fill us in on any additional thoughts staff have been able to give to just how to really delineate the bike lane from the car lanes to help prevent kind of unwanted incursions.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Jaworski, staff do not recommend bollards for this particular design. However, we will make every effort to explore the feasibility of implementing bollards at strategic locations during the detailed design phase.
Okay, so that would be kind of introducing them where it's possible to kind of help delineate the spaces.
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, yeah, that's correct. We need to wait till detailed design to make those evaluations.
Okay, no, that's great. And the other, no, that's all my questions for right now. Thank you, Mayor.
Well, thank you, Councillor Bonagor, and thank you, Gavin, for your presentation. With that, I would like to ask the Deputy Clerk to invite in our delegate, David Truman, Interim Chair, Cycle, Waterloo Region. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bodley, did you have a question for Gavin? I'm just seeing that now.
I did, if that's okay.
Yeah, please go ahead, David. David's been patient and waiting for a long time, so another couple of minutes would be okay. Please go ahead,
I hate to keep David waiting, but I'm gonna ask a question that he may touch on in his presentation, anyways. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Has there been any discussion, or can you highlight for me some of the conversation around potentially eliminating the right turn lane on King Street to create sort of a better cycling experience in that area, and particularly at the intersection?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, we have looked at removing the right turn lane at King Street and determined that there was benefits to maintaining the lane. Maintaining the lane provides a refuge for vehicles exiting the 234 Union Street parking lot or Dodge lane, and removing it might create sightline concerns. Traffic modeling suggests that if we remove the right turn lane, or if the right turn lane is maintained, future queues westbound on Union Street will likely extend to just before Mary Street during the peak hours. If the right turn lane is removed, those queues will extend through Mary Street regularly at peak hours. The impact of these longer queues would likely lead to some rerouting of traffic through the adjacent neighborhoods, something that we would want to look at more closely. And the Safety and Risk Management Review anticipated that only experienced and confident cyclists would likely use the painted bike lanes between King and Mary due to the lack of cycling infrastructure beyond King, and that these cyclists would be comfortable with the proposed design. Those cyclists that are not comfortable going all the way to King Street could use Mary Street to divert to one of the many adjacent low-stress streets and achieve, arrive at their destinations that way. Any other alternatives to remove the conflict point would also involve changes to the intersection that would involve correspondence with the region to seek permission for those changes.
Thank you for that, Gavin. That's all for me, Mayor Jaworski.
Thank you. And without further ado, we'll look to bring up our delegates' presentation and invite David to join us.
Hello. Thank you for having me, Mayor and councillors. As you know, of course, this isn't the first time I've spoken about the Union Street East reconstruction. And I think it's amazing that this is happening right after the Transform WR presentation and your endorsement of that plan, not only of that plan, but a much more ambitious plan. And indeed, I would have been delegating on that subject if I wasn't signed up for Union Street East. Next slide, please. And of course, that is the context in which this subject of Union Street comes up. You will be aware that you just passed the Transform WR plan, and the actions I've put up on the screen, the strategy 1.1, the actions 1.1.1 call for active transportation corridors, not segments that are disconnected, but corridors that continue straight through. Action 1.1.3 calls to prioritize active transportation. In other words, maybe the cars don't take precedence in all cases. And action 1.1.4 calls for to de-incentivize driving. So maybe a little queuing is not such a bad thing. You will also see the two little diagrams that come out of the recently passed Transportation Action Plan, which shows Union as a major cycling facility as a protected bike lane, not unprotected painted bike lanes. Next slide, please. So just for absolute clarity, I am not advocating for alternative 3. I am advocating for alternative 1B, but with some crucial improvements. Next slide, please. We all know that cycling infrastructure has been constructed opportunistically, not only in the city of Waterloo, but in the region. This is an opportunity to continue protected cycling lanes from Mary through to King. And of course, we need to pursue the opportunity to continue those in the future through to the Iron Horse Trail by the city of Kitchener. And of course, to also pursue connections to the ion stations that are found north and south of Union. This is an active transportation and transit connection point. We cannot afford to pass up an opportunity like this. We know that when we don't take the opportunity, it takes decades to fill in the missing pieces. This has to happen now. The next slide, please. So, you know, this is not an engineering drawing. This is just a quick amateur job showing that with the elimination of the right turn lane, which the traffic study said was not essential, you can fit those protected bike lanes right through to King. Next slide, please. The only argument that I have heard from the staff report against this continuing the lanes right through to King is the misalignment issue of Union across King. And I've shown here, straight off of Google Maps, Union Street across King. And if you squint, maybe you can see a little bit of misalignment. But then just a couple blocks up, we have King Street through William Street, a huge misalignment. And then if we go south on King into Kitchener, we have a huge misalignment over a much narrower street, meaning it's a much bigger issue down at King and Queen. I would love to hear a justification why this can happen with new construction in other places on King, and yet it is verboten at Union. And I would point out that, you know, the staff report referred to the TAC guidelines, and Mayor Jaworski himself told me, we recognize guidelines are just guidelines. If we want to override the guidelines, we can do so. Next slide, please. And as for the cycleways being roll curbs, surely we have learned this lesson by now. Roll curbs are a disaster. They look like parking, they encourage parking, and all over the region where we have roll curbs, I have observed parked cars or delivery vehicles even more commonly. There's a myth that it provides for winter snow clearing, but here you can see on the right, the rolled curb lane on Columbia, and this is after 2 weeks of melting. You can see how much snow is in that cycleway there. So it simply doesn't get cleared. In the Transportation Master Plan, city staff who were interviewed actually said they prefer a full curb for maintenance reasons. Next slide, please. Those corner radii on the turns from Union onto King, they allow cars to go around those corners at high speeds. We need smaller turn radii, which not only provide a safer environment for cyclists, but very much so for pedestrians. If we can slow down cars down at the intersections where most injuries and deaths occur, then we've created a much safer environment for all vulnerable road users. Next slide, please. So I put you 3 points in summary, and I believe this is a test for council. You've just passed the Transformation WR. It's calling for active transportation corridors. It's calling for prioritizing active transportation. It's calling for de-incentivizing driving. How can you possibly not take this opportunity at this time to make Union Street as powerful an active transportation corridor as possible, eventually going all the way from Lancaster through to Westmount? So please challenge staff to find the way to extend the cycleways between Mary and King Streets. Insist that the raised cycleways be implemented with a full curb, not a roll curb, and ask staff to make the turning radii as small as possible to enhance safety for all vulnerable road users. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to take questions.
Very much, David. I know Councillor Vasic, I think, had a question of staff. I'll just wait to see if any councillors have questions for you as a delegate. Just one moment, please. And I see questions of staff coming up. So with that, thank you very much, David, for your presentation and delegation today, and certainly be taken into consideration as we move into the debate area. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now I'll move back to questions of staff. I know Councillor Vasic had her hand up just quickly at the end there before the delegate started, so I'll go with Councillor Vasic first.
Thanks. Through you, Mayor Jaworski. This is probably to Gavin. A couple questions. What's the problem with rerouting cars in the neighborhood if that right turn lane were to come out?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, if cars reroute to the neighborhood, that means that there'll be more traffic on the adjacent streets, which my understanding is have had traffic problems in the past and have had a lot of traffic calming to address that.
Right. Okay. I mean, okay, yes, I don't want this to come across in the wrong way, but I'm sure that they've had traffic problems, but I also think they have a lot of a strong neighborhood to advocate for traffic calming. So I think that they have good traffic calming in the neighborhood, and wondering if it might actually support a little bit more on the neighborhood streets. So if we were to think that, oh, a little bit more traffic might be okay because it's so well calmed, I'd be willing to think through that. My second question is around rerouting the bike. So you also said that maybe less strong cyclists regardless would likely reroute on Mary. So I was wondering if anyone could remind me about the transportation master plan and if Mary might be part of an uptown grid of some sort for cyclists.
Yeah, we can.
Through your Mayor Jaworski, I'd like to refer this question to Chris Hodgson, who I believe is on the line. Chris, are you available?
Yes, I am. Could you repeat the question, please, Councillor Vasic?
Oh, for sure. Also, you always say my name how it's supposed to be said. I don't think I've ever said that to you. That's really nice, Chris. So Gavin had mentioned that likely or possibly cyclists who aren't as comfortable going from Mary to Moore as it's designed right now would likely reroute onto Mary. And so I was curious if you could remind me about any cycling grid uptown, and if Mary is a part of that, like would that rerouting actually fit within current plans?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. Yeah, essentially the low stress streets around that either both north and south of Union both connect to key destinations, take people to the ion stations just across the Kitchener border and into Waterloo. So the low stress streets certainly provide an option, and that was kind of emphasized as a whole across the city of low stress streets being alternatives for cyclists that aren't so comfortable on the main corridors, high traffic, larger vehicles, faster vehicles, etc. So that would certainly be in keeping with the essence of the Transportation Master Plan.
Okay, thanks. And then from your perspective, doing the Transportation Master Plan or leading it, do you think that if there were curbs, like not roll curbs, and if it were more protected from Mary to King, is your sense that cyclists who maybe aren't as confident might be more likely to use that than if it were painted? And do you think they'd want to use that?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski. It's a very good question. I think it's a challenging one to answer in the fact that there is no cycling infrastructure on King or on Union west of King, or even in the foreseeable future for people to connect to. So, getting people to King Street, if that's council's objective, gets them to a point. But then if they're not comfortable cycling on King Street, for example, with no infrastructure and next to Ion, or crossing Union to access Union Street west of King with no infrastructure, then it's really, if the cyclists would probably be more comfortable with a continuous facility through the corridor as opposed to piecemeal. But either way, the way the construction is phased, this will just be a section of the road anyway, not a complete corridor. Does that make sense?
I think so, possibly. I mean, maybe I'll ask a question next that will make it clear that it doesn't make sense to me. But
Okay.
But so I guess then the other thought is, even though we understand that Kitchener maybe doesn't have plans to extend to that area, so what you're saying is you're not going to connect there. Like, does putting this forward first to say, no, actually we would love to connect people who live in Ward 5, for example, by Bright Up Park, all the way over to Belmont, so that as a Waterloo region, we we're actually supporting the economy better. Like, I wouldn't bike from my house, go down Mary Street, go out of the way, and then go to Belmont Village or something. I mean, I might go to Uptown, so maybe that would be good for Waterloo, but you get what I'm saying, right? So would us kind of making the changes that the delegate is suggesting actually prompt or encourage the Kitchener to maybe think through moving their plans up a little bit?
Through you, Mayor Jaworski, I don't believe that's a question I could answer. The City of Kitchener were involved with the development of the City of Waterloo Transportation Master Plan, and we had identified very early on in the process that the Waterloo's portion would receive separated cycling of some kind, of course, and with the City of Kitchener's cycling master plan being developed around the same time, obviously their plans did not align. So there was obviously an opportunity for that, and I imagine there was discussions at some level, but obviously City of Kitchener staff could answer that. But they were two projects of both of knew of each other's kind of the street networks and how things were crossing both north and south and east and west into the various municipalities. So Yeah, not a question I could really truly answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, thanks, Chris. And then I have one more, I think, for you, Gavin, possibly, which is that what would, if we did want to explore a little bit further the process of removing the right turn lane, what would we need to do as a council to ask for that?
To you, Mayor Jaworski. To do that, we would just need to move to the detailed design phase and initiate discussions with the region.
Okay, thanks. That's all for me.
Thank you. I'm just going to note to council that we are well past our 5 o'clock stop time, and we do have to stop in the next 4 or 5 minutes. So thank you, Councillor Hanmer. I see you've taken your hand down. I will ask Councillor, the only hand left I see up, I think, is for Councillor Bonagor. And I'll just ask Councillor Bonagor, do you expect more discussion and debate, or are we coming to an end? Because either we have to recess now, or perhaps try and continue on, see how far we can get.
Well, I just have some questions of staff following on from the delegates, the delegation. They're quite short questions.
Yeah, and just to Councillor, yeah, Councillor Bodley has questions. So I think what we're going to have to do, unfortunately, is recess here, and we will reconvene with the dial-in for council at 6:15, Julie? And staff will be back before that, because we just have to, by the time we do all the cleanup on that, staff barely get a 30-minute break. So let's recess now, and I'll see you all back at the dial-in time. Thank you.